Good evening. Thanks everyone for joining the Cherry Hill Board of Education meeting for January 12th, 2021. Public notice of this meeting pursuant to the Open Public Meetings Act has been given by the board secretary in the following manner. A, posting written notice on the official school bulletin board at the administration building on January 6th, 2021. B, transmitted notice to the Courier Post and Philadelphia Inquirer on January 6th, 2021. And C, transmitted notice to the clerk of Cherry Hill Township on January 6th, 2021. Please stand with us for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mrs. Sugars?
Mrs. Arroyo?
Here.
Mrs. Stratton?
Here.
Ms. Friedel?
Here.
Mrs. Matlack?
Here.
Mr. Avadia?
Here.
Mrs. Schultz?
Here.
Ms. Stern?
Here.
Mrs. Tong? Mrs. Neary?
Here. And Sally is also on as well.
Yep, I got her. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I don't believe we have any board recognition this evening, Dr. Malash, or presentations.
We do not, Mrs. Neary, not tonight. We will at the end of the month on the 26th.
Okay, so then do we want to move into the administrative report?
No administrative reports tonight either.
Okay. All right, so then we'll move to correspondence. And I believe Mrs. Matlack, you said you wanted to start with a bit of correspondence.
Yes, I have one piece. I attended the county leadership meeting at the state level. That's the meeting that occurs every 2 weeks. And all 21 counties were present for that. That happened on January 11th at 4 p.m. And the topic of this meeting was student regression, which I thought was very timely because that is a conversation that's happening in many districts at the local level and clearly at the state level as well. So they had Ray Pinney from the New Jersey School Boards Association had invited 2 districts to address us on what they were doing at different levels. So we had Oakland Public Schools represented by Jennifer Zimmerly, and she talked about their pre-K, they're a pre-K to 8 district. So she talked about things that they're doing. I starred a couple of things. I won't go through them. I thought that it was very interesting. These are things that the Oakland Public Schools is going to be implementing due to the hybrid and remote nature of this past school year. And these are things that you'll see, especially when I give my C&I report later in the meeting, that we already have in place here. One of them is a summer program, an extended school year program for students that they are going to especially target pre-K and English language learners. And they have, they're going to have a workshop for parents. They had one before school started, and they're going to have another one similar to, sounded like similar to the parent workshops, series of workshops that we had earlier in the year before school started. She talked about, this is, keep in mind, this is a pre-K to 8 district. And so this was primarily with their middle school age population, but they have an issue of kids turning off the camera. And so their district is discussing that. And then the high school principal from Cliffside Park, who also spoke to us about what they're doing, talked about how they are dealing with that as well. And, you know, some of the same concerns. that have been brought up to us about, and it was mentioned in let me see, I read the article that Dr. Morton in the Cherry Hill Sun had written, and he can't remember if it was in that article or he spoke to us at our meeting last week. I may be confusing the two, but he said that talking to us about the cameras, and that the students see suggestions from teachers as mandates. And this high school principal mentioned the same thing. And so there was talk about using Go Guardian, all the same things that we have talked about, and some of the things we have in place as well. The elementary school talked about adding a counselor and we're very fortunate here in Cherry Hill. We have a counselor in every single school, even at the elementary level. The principal at Cliffside Park High School talked about they're an urban district, and they're having a huge problem with failures. They had a 92% increase in failures at the high school level, and a 600% increase in their feeding middle school population in failures. And so they are doing some unique things there to deal with that. I won't get into all of that because we have our own issues, just as a point of context for us. So that was the whole meeting. It actually went longer than the typical hour or so of the meeting. Went about an hour and 20 minutes. I'll report on the next meeting in 2 weeks. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Mrs. Stern, I believe you also had correspondence for this evening.
Yes, thank you, Mrs. Neary. So I had the opportunity to attend the Zone PTA meeting this morning. It was my first opportunity to attend as a new board member. And there was a lot of discussion in the meeting, and a lot I just wanted to mention I thought was really a lot of interesting information. So there was discussion shared about efforts from the PTA to support character ed, ongoing character ed, and specifically supporting recruiting of teachers, and teachers, specifically teachers who represent our students of color in our district, that can be seen as, people to relate to. And so that was really exciting to hear those efforts along those lines. We got a chance to have our new assistant superintendents, Dr. Mahan and Mrs. Wethington, be able to be introduced. And it was great to hear them discuss their backgrounds and their years and experience with the district and their roles that they'll be fulfilling. And it was nice to hear Mrs. Wethington talk about really wanting to help kind of develop a legacy of Cherry Hill, really focusing on equity and continuing to develop that in the district and really become a leader nationwide. So that was nice to hear, kind of a really long-term vision for the role. It was great. There was a discussion about and questions about whether and why the district is not currently using Go Guardian software. Dr. Malash explained that because our district does not have one-to-one technology for all of our students, because not all of our students have requested Chromebooks or one-to-one technology, about 6,000 of our students have district supplied Chromebooks. Therefore, the software can only be loaded on the district supplied Chromebooks and not on the personal devices that some of our other students are using. So it's not effective across the board. And that's really been the main barrier to implementing this Go Guardian program, which is kind of a monitoring software. There were questions about Mount Misery, which are this year's, all of our 6th grade students from this year unfortunately missed out on that experience. And last year's seventh graders, this year's seventh graders from Carusi who would have gone last spring missed out on. And at this point, it's really hard to determine what the future will be for those group of students. But certainly it seems like it's not realistic to expect that to happen in this school year, unfortunately. That's just a shame, but it's certainly on the minds of the administration and the staff and the parents, and of course the kids. There was discussion about the return to hybrid next week, which there's a lot of excitement about. And Dr. Malash explained that he meets every Thursday with superintendents from around the county, with the Director of Health, Dr. Noako, I believe is his name, how I pronounce it. I'm sorry?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. And the information that comes regarding the current status of the virus levels and kind of the zones that we're in, this Cali zone, I guess they're called, comes from the previous Saturday's data. So we're always a little bit behind on that information. Currently, Camden County is still in the orange zone. And so because Camden County is still in the orange zone, which it has been in for quite some time, that is a zone that Cherry Hill can go back to hybrid, our district can go back to hybrid in that zone. I think there was an important discussion about other questions just regarding returning to school. Dr. Malash talked about some of the open substitute positions and the strong efforts the district has been making to fill them and some successes with that, including these 25 positions of floating replacement teachers, also increasing certain positions that are higher pay rates for substitute teachers. So encouraging recently graduated new teachers to apply for substitute positions. So a lot of effort to make sure we have all the teacher staffing that we needed. The return to learn committees are due to reconvene February 1st and 2nd. There was, I thought, a really important discussion, information shared about the food distribution that our district is continuing to provide every single week. And I believe it's Monday and Wednesday, Dr. Malash? No, I'm sorry.
Just on Mondays, Ms. Stern, noon to 2 and 4 to 6 at High School East. We do 7 breakfasts and 7 lunches in that distribution.
And which is just a really, really important resource. And it's open to any student family in the district. So any student. So it's just, I think.
Or also, Ms. Stern, to any child that lives in Cherry Hill, age 3 to 18, even if they're not registered here, they could be homeschooled children. They could attend private or parochial school. As long as they live in town, they're eligible.
And that's so great that our district continues to push out that information. And I really wanted to make sure we mentioned it again, because Dr. Malash, you really emphasize, although we do have, and we have 2 sites, Cherry Hill High School West and Cherry Hill High School East. We have on average, about 750 students who are coming to High School East to pick up meals, and about 625 at High School West to pick up meals. Even though that's the case, and it's great, we want to reach as many students as possible and support these students with the food to help them grow and learn well. And you did share also in the meeting that during non-pandemic times, only 60% of the students who are eligible in our district to receive free and reduced lunch actually get lunches on a regular basis, and only 12% were getting breakfast meals on a regular basis of the students who are eligible. So we really do want to make sure we're all spreading the word that families, can sign up, and they can sign up at any time. And we offer the information and applications in different languages, in English and Spanish and other. So I think just really important for families to know that and to share that information. We have this resource. We want to make sure we're helping our students with that. Some of the continued questions that came up, just what happens if a student is signed up for hybrid or in person? So students can, the day of that school day, if they need to stay home and be virtual, they can email if they're in higher levels, they can, I guess, email their teachers, the parents or the students can reach out to the guidance department for the day, or the principal to let them know. And high school students would need to call the attendance office and let them know if they're switching to all virtual that day. And that also, if it's going to be an ongoing thing, they should be called. And then also the district is going to be on a quarter, kind of every quarter. So coming up, I think it was February. I'm sorry. When is the next determination date, Dr. Malash?
For February 1st, Ms. Stern, there's correspondence, I believe, going out late this afternoon.
Thank you. Okay, so and that's the next time that parents can make a decision whether or not their children will stay either hybrid or remote for the next marking period of time, I guess quarter it was. Just a few more things, and this is really long, and bear with me, my first time. So we talked about the great town hall meetings that have been happening. There's another one scheduled on the 19th. So just next week, we're going to have another town hall for the community, another one February 16th, and then they will be happening every third Monday of the month. And there will be future discussions in some of the future town halls about the bond and other items that are relevant to the whole Cherry Hill Public Schools community. And we talked about the issue of funding and fair funding. It's projected that the governor will be coming out with the budget for the state, which includes the budget for schools. I think that's in March, the initial budget. I keep asking for clarification, I apologize. And then we talked about the fact that this year Cherry Hill Public Schools received a decrease of $2.4 million for our school budget. And we are hoping that at the very least, we will not lose any more, but stay flat, but preferably we'd like to see our budget go back up as it was increasing because we've been so underfunded for so many years, and there was a law passed in 2018 to shift that. So I think, our zone PTA has a fair funding committee, which hasn't been meeting during COVID, but perhaps that may change and that could be addressed. So last couple things, we were just hearing about some of the things that are extras that are going on, author days, and focusing there's an author coming to the middle school who's going to be doing a virtual reading, which is kind of great because a lot of people can tune into that. And it's a discussion of a book dealing with anti-racism ideas, 20 actions to wake up and take note. And also we talked about with Steve Redfern, who is the CHEA president, talked about some of the ways in which our teachers and through the NJEA make contributions with grant money to support a lot of our student activities as well. And so that stuff has changed this year because of the nature of the schools not being open, but those efforts. And lastly, the zone PTA attendees talked about ways to, again, welcome back the teachers and kind of thank the teachers and show appreciation next week as our schools are intended to return to hybrid learning. So, and the idea of just, recognizing that our teachers are working really hard in this model, and we want to thank them for that. So that's it.
Thank you, Mrs. Stern, for that very thorough readout of the zone meeting. We appreciate it.
Mr. Ovadia as well.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you.
So just clarifying question. So Ms. Stern, so 3 to 18 students can be in any school as long as they live in Cherry Hill.
Correct.
19 to 21, if there are students, they qualify?
Correct. Or if they're still students in the district, or they're still our students but are attending an out-of-district placement, still register with the school district.
So it is possible, 19 to 21, we can serve quite a
Yes,
population within.
absolutely.
Within Cherry.
Correct.
Okay, I just want to clarify.
Yes, good question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Avadia. Was there any other correspondence? Okay. Okay, that moves us to the first public comment. There will be two opportunities for public comment this evening. The first public comment session is for agenda items only. There will be another public comment section for any topic at the end of the meeting. Each individual will have up to 3 minutes for their public comment, and then we'll need to state their full name and address. Currently, we have one public comment. It's Ben.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you give your full name and address?
Yes, my name is Ben Shore and my address is 12 Manor House Court.
Thank you, Mr. Shore.
So on the agenda, was there security? Can I just talk broadly about that?
I don't believe that there's an action agenda item with security
Yeah.
tonight.
Yeah, I
All
don't
right,
believe
well
so.
all right, well then that's all. I'll wait till the second part. Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks,
thank you,
Ben.
Mr. Shore. Okay, I don't see any others. Mrs. Sugars, did you have any comments submitted?
I have 2 comments, but they are for the second public comment period.
Okay, great. Well, then that brings us to our board work session. The first one is curriculum and instruction, and I'll turn that over to the committee chair, Mrs. Matlack.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. We had a few items on our agenda. We met January 4th at 7 p.m. And we started off by talking about our 2 summer programs that we offer for students, the Extended School Year Program and Camp Thomas Paine. The board members received the spec sheets on both of those in the Friday memo. The ESY, the Extended School Year Program, will run from June 28th to August 12th, Monday to Thursday. The time period's being extended by 2 weeks because of the pandemic that we're in. Barkley will house the preschool program from 9 to 12. Johnson will house the elementary program from 9 to 12 with our special needs students 9 to 2. And Crucy will house our middle and high school students from 9 to 12, again with our special needs students attending 9 to 1. We have an anticipated increase of a need for teachers this year. 75 we had last year. This year we're going to budget for 80 teachers. We're planning for this to be in person, but fluid situation. But we plan for everything. And we're estimating serving about 625 students. This is based on the numbers from last year. The estimated cost for the program is $884,131 estimated. And that includes staffing, which is 80 teachers, 3 lead teachers, 110 educational assistants, 18 related services personnel, 3 nurses, teacher and educational assistant substitutes. It also includes contracted services, supplies, and PPE. The other program that we run in the summer, Camp Thomas Paine, is the Title I Summer Academy program. That will run July 6th to August 5th, Monday to Thursday, 9 to 12. We're extending it by 1 week into August. Morning academic, afternoon will be enrichment. We anticipate serving about 200 students, grades 1 to 5. There will be 20 academic teachers, 2 English second language enrichment staff in the afternoons. Estimated cost of that program comes from Title I funds, and that's estimated as $199,188. That includes 20 teachers, 1 teacher in charge, 2 ESL teachers, 15 enrichment staff, 1 enrichment staff supervisor, a nurse, and a secretary. It also includes food, breakfast, lunch, and snack for the students, and transportation. The PPE costs will be added to that number once the final numbers are determined. We talked about the follow-up to the course of study booklet. There were some questions about the collaborative consultative model, and Mrs. Wethington spoke to us about that. And so I'd just like to ask her when she can get on, Dr. Mahan, if she will just reiterate a couple of the points that she told the committee about their questions to the county office and the difference between the names of the program, secondary special class and resource replacement class. So I don't know, should I wait until the end?
Mrs.
Or-
Wethington heard you. She is getting ready to respond. Mrs. Wethington,
Okay,
be
all
muted.
right.
Mrs. Wethington, you're muted. Yeah, now you're muted. I think you just need to turn your headset on.
There we go. Okay, my
Yeah.
my mic was up. I apologize. Struggling. So,
Were you
Mr.
able to hear
Wisely.
me?
Yes, I was, Mrs. Matlack.
Oh, okay.
So, Mr. Wisely, Mr. Goldthorpe, Dr. Mahan, and I worked to do some follow-up based on some feedback that we received from the community and from CHSEPTA and from the CPAG. So as part of that follow-up, we met with the county office to just ensure that we were going in the direction that we should be going in, and that as far as regulations are concerned, we were on the right page, and we are. We also spoke with a consultant that we work with, Marianne Joseph, who, if you recall, participated in a meeting around September where she talked to the CNI committee about our co-teaching data. She has been working with our co-teachers for several years. We're going to utilize her to provide support to the teachers at the high school level as we're looking at the consultation model. We also sought advice from one of our solicitors just to make sure from a legal perspective that we were going in the right direction. So we felt pretty confident after having all those conversations and doing follow-up that we were properly planned for what we like to do. The one clarification that we did find out was that we will call the class concepts for sure, but on the IEP, it will be called the secondary special class. So that's the one clarification and update that we have.
And if I recall, you told us at the committee meeting that the difference is in who delivers the primary
Yes.
instruction.
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. I forgot that part.
That's
So
okay.
in a resource replacement class, the primary teacher would be the special education teacher. In the secondary special class, the primary teacher would be the general education teacher. And so the special education teacher will provide a consultative service to the general education teacher, helping them to impact the lessons, look at learning strategies, different kind of interventions that they can provide in the classroom or that the general education teacher can provide in the classroom. There will be a resource so that the general education teacher is able to help the students access the curriculum.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate
Certainly.
that. And then we went on to get an update about the Social Justice Committee. December 8th and 15th, Dr. Hansen met with the staff about vision for the course. And on December 15th, that included students. On December 8th, Dr. Allison and Dr. Greason talked about the 6th or focused on the 6th to 12th perspective. And teaching from a theme perspective. The possible course structure will be about 8 weeks or so of common curriculum, with the rest of the course being student-driven in areas of individual interest. There's going to be professional development on February 12th. It's going to be a lecture series that's being developed by our assistant superintendents. So we'll hear more about that at our February meeting, I'm sure. Next up, we had a presentation from our secondary school principals, about grade comparisons. And that this ties into what I mentioned during correspondence about concern about how are the students doing? How are they, faring in this environment that we're going through? So the presentation that they gave us and the board members, this was included in our memo as well. It was called The Journey, which I thought was very appropriate after they went through it, and board members who saw the presentation. We're all on a journey here, and we're all figuring it out and doing things and learning, just like our students do and learn and make things better. So the principals talked about different parts. Dr. Morton spoke to us about marking period grades. He said, and some of these things apply regardless of which principal was talking about it, apply to the whole level. Some of it are school specific, and I'll try to differentiate that. So Dr. Morton said some students are thriving, some are consistent, and there's some who are struggling. There's no grade given below a 50% because they didn't want any student to feel their grade was insurmountable as they adjusted to the remote model and what we're going through. Teachers are being much more deliberate in their assessments and the essential measurements, critical aspects of the curriculum. Dr. Perry talked about some professional development specifically that's happening at East. He talked about the anchor text for the faculty. It's a book by Carol Dweck, Mindset. And also they're talking about culturally responsive teaching and the brain. There's been a huge shift in by teachers in the individual feedback and learning. They're addressing the social emotional learning in small communities, small student groups, focusing on student strengths and not deficits so that they can build upon the strengths. The lesson plans are being monitored closely for fidelity and adhering to the focus. The staff and the administration are doing increased home visits this year with students and families who are having problems engaging. There's some acute concerns. This is, he emphasized that this is 1 year of a 12 to 13 year process. And let's see, Mr. O'Connor talked about grade comparisons, and he used as the example Beck, since he's the principal at Beck. He told us that there are an increase in D's and F's. There's more of these grades, but not by more students. He wanted to point that out. And it's impacting students across levels. They're focusing on issues of attendance and engagement at the middle school level. And then Mr. Guy from Rosa talked to us about student trauma and how the COVID parent essential workers, students responsible for younger siblings, that they really feel that should be added to the adverse childhood experiences list. And they are, even though it's not officially, that they are considering these adverse childhood experiences and treating them as such. They're trying to increase access and opportunity, especially for these students who are having these challenges. They are doing home visits. Mr. Guy talked about, which I didn't know that this was happening. They're delivering meals to students' homes whose parents are working and can't get to school to get it. They are delivering meals along with some of these visits. Dr. Birdie from Crucy talked about adaptive and innovative and creative things that are happening. Home visits, I've already mentioned. They're talking about opportunities for support for students to deal with isolation and online fatigue. They have peer connections, study sessions. It's called Mustang Study Sessions. They have peer mentors for social connections. They increase their conference time. They found that this remote model allowed for more families to participate in conferences. So instead of just allowing a week, they allowed 3 weeks this year for that. They talked about that the schools are ready for the kids. Each school has a pandemic response team. They meet regularly to ensure a safe and smooth return. There's ongoing professional development for the staff, and he talked about communication with the town hall to the parents. Some board members asked some great questions. Mr. Goodwin asked a question about the concerns that the students during the cultural proficiency presentation shared with us. And he also asked about teacher trauma. And Dr. Morton said that they're developing mindset and student voice and comfort level with the students to share those concerns with them so that they can directly address them. And this is where, okay, so I now apologize. It was not in the article. It was at our meeting. Here it is in my notes that he said, we have to acknowledge that sometimes suggestions from teachers are seen as mandates. And so the principals and staff, at least that from the principal's point of view, are aware of that, and they are addressing that issue. Rosie asked, is the model for everyone or just those who need help? Dr. Morton said it's for everyone, and there's individual support specifically for those who need it. We went on to the theatrical play production. Rosa is going to be doing Legally Blonde Jr. in June, and they're planning for it to be virtual. All their paperwork is in and everything's good. We briefly talked about the return to learn. I don't know if Dr. Mahan, you have anything you want to add? At our meeting, we just talked about the 2 committee meetings that are going to occur and that we're going to hybrid on the 19th. So I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add. Okay, sounds good. That's all we had. Are there any comments from the other committee members? Anything that I left out or you want to?
No, that was a thorough readout, Mrs. Matlack. I didn't have anything, Ms. Arroyo. Okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.
It looks like Ms. Friedel has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry, my screen
I
went
just
blank.
saw the hand go up.
My
sorry.
screen went blank for a minute there and I couldn't see anything, but since my camera light was on, I assumed that I was still here, so.
I was waiting for the committee to answer if they had comments. I do have a couple of questions. So let me I think I'm going to start backwards. So all of the wonderful things that are going on at the secondary level schools, how are those being communicated to the families?
I think I should let Dr. Mahan.
I'll jump
Answer
in
that?
here. So all of the information that we just shared with you to the family, some of it, depending on what the circumstances, is communicated directly one-to-one with the family. Some of the information is shared out via Blackboard. Some information is going out to parents through the Genesis Parent Portal. It just really depends on what the issue is, what is being communicated, and how the principal has decided, or the administrative team, to communicate with families. So a concrete example of that would be with the delivering of meals. We have several staff members across the district delivering meals. That is coordinated typically between the building principal or assistant principal that the student would report to if we were in person, and the school nurse.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I add to that real quick? Just based on her comment, I know some of the interventions that they described. Can you hear me? Yeah.
It's very choppy.
It's very choppy, Rosie.
It's okay.
Okay.
Can I, Mrs. Friedel, can I just chime in? And Mrs. Arroyo, just based on what you started to say, one of the things, and this may have been where you were going, but the entire presentation was focused around some themes. It was data perspective, grades, trauma, and then the return to learn on the 19th. And I believe Mr. Arroyo was going to speak to some of the interventions that the principal spoke about. And some of the interventions, that slide was actually titled Adaptive, Innovative, and Creative, where the principal spoke a lot about peer connections, where students were working with each other to help increase engagement in the school community, how they were doing face-to-face home visits, not only for food, but also for resources and materials. And some were just to say hello to students and make sure that the students knew that the teachers had them in mind and to make connections. And then one that Dr. Birdie spoke about, and I believe Mrs. Matlack covered this one in her report, regarding peer tutoring, but also recognizing that there are students within our community who are tutoring others who may not be on National Junior Honor Society, but who have something to offer to their peers. And they just talked about a wide breadth of interventions to support students where their particular needs were, and maybe not necessarily the way that we would reach those interventions if we were in person. So I don't know if that is it, Mrs. Arroyo, but I know we talked about that when we were in the meeting and you had a similar comment.
Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Okay, so the summer programming, Camp Thomas Paine and ESY. Just for clarification, Camp Thomas Paine, is it 9 to 12 or is it full day?
So campaign is yes and no. So the academic portion of the program is from 9 to 12, but because it is a Title I program, we offer wraparound services.
Okay.
So students can come in the morning from 7 to 9, and then there are enrichment and wraparound services from 1 until 6.
Okay, thank you, because I was a little confused. So with both ESY and the campaign, are we looking at increasing numbers from the number of students we've served in past years, or are we still looking to serve the same number of students?
So for ESY, the IEP team determines if a student is recommended for ESY. So I can't tell you that that number is going to be different. It really depends on what the IEP team thinks about the services that the child needs. If they're going to be acquiring a service, we want to continue to work on it. If we think they may regress, then they'd be recommended for ESY.
Okay, so ESY is pretty much individually driven.
Yes, absolutely.
And for campaign, we have discussed increasing our numbers. However, not knowing what the requirements will be hopefully coming out of the pandemic in July, we have stuck with the number of students at 200 because we do believe that we can safely accommodate that number of students for this year. And that number has remained the same for the entire time the program has been for the entire length of the program. So for many years, we've always stayed at 200. We typically base that number on the amount of the grant allocation for Title I, and then how much the schools use during the academic year. So it is a possibility.
So going back, and Ms. Matlack, you probably won't know the answer to this because you were at a presentation, but Oakland, you had mentioned, was going to be doing summer programs preschool through 8th grade. Did they mention how they're going to fund that?
Let me look at my notes, but I believe she talked about Title I
Okay.
programs. Let me just take a look.
Okay. I guess where I'm just, concerned about that we have so many children who potentially are struggling more than in the past. And are we giving enough support to those students that, aren't quite where we want them to be?
Yeah, I made it in my notes. It said that they were going to use Title I's and they're going to focus on pre-K and ELL, English language learners. It's not a program that they've done in the past.
Okay, thank you. One last question. This one goes to the proposed, and I did not write the appropriate terminology, so I guess this is really more for Mrs. Wethington and Mrs. Matlack. But what is the benefit of having a gen ed teacher being the primary teacher for basically a self-contained classroom? I'm going to guess that the students have different IEP needs, so it's not per se that they all have X as their IEP designation. So without the special ed background that teachers get for certification, what's the plus side to having a gen ed teacher teach with consultation as opposed to the special ed teacher doing the teaching?
So the benefit is that the students are going to have access to a teacher who has spent more time with the content. That is in no way saying that our teachers are not qualified, but the teachers who are typically teaching 5 courses of something every day certainly are more comfortable with the content, and we think that translates to instruction to students. A student's not disabled in science, they're disabled in reading fluency, math computation. So that's the bridge. The special ed teacher will be the bridge for that disability to the curriculum.
So how often do you propose, or do you think the consultation will happen? Is it daily?
It'll happen at least twice a week, and it's really going to depend on the number of students that we have in the class, the number of sections that we have. It'll be at least twice a week at a minimum.
And one last comment, and this will be my last question. Is there a plan for professional development for those teachers who will, be going into the special ed room as their primary teacher?
Yes, we have a robust plan. We will be starting on the 12th. We've asked Mrs. Joseph to come work with our gen ed teachers. She is a master teacher. She's a master teacher in special education. She's really an expert in co-teaching and teaching partnerships. She's been working with us for probably 5 years. We've seen a great deal of success. We believe that she's going to be a real asset to the program. We can certainly extend her reach should we need to. So we feel pretty confident about the PD for teachers for sure.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Anybody else have any other questions or comments? Ms. Stern?
Thank you, Mrs. Matlack. So just a couple related questions regarding the collaborative consultative model. Regarding Mrs. Joseph, is she going to be available kind of on an as-needed basis? Let's say if something comes up in for the gen ed teachers, something comes up in class that day, but something that they're just maybe haven't mastered the skill with in terms of the students' needs, or are there going to be kind of teacher mentors available to kind of perhaps supplement Mrs. Joseph's consultation?
So our vision was not to have her available kind of on an as needed basis. We do have a contract with her and we have hours available with her for sure. If we needed that, we could certainly do it. Our plan had been to roll out a pretty robust PD plan for the teachers who are involved, and then have our own staff, Mr. Wisely, Mr. Goldthorpe, also be spending a little bit more time in those classrooms to be able to provide some oversight and identify any needs that may occur earlier so we can address it right away.
Okay, great, thank you. And I just wanted to clarify, because I'm still not clear, these classes, are they going to be subject-based? Because you're talking about the gen ed teachers having specialties in those subjects.
Yes, this is only for science. So
Only for
it would
science,
be
okay.
yes, only for science.
Somehow that like had
High
gone
school
out of my head.
science, not elementary, not middle school,
Right,
just high school science.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, that's wonderful. And just one last question, Mrs. Matlack or Mrs. Wethington, Dr. Mahan. You know, in reviewing the presentation regarding some of the data from the high school principals and the middle school principals, it looks like, you know, there has been evidence through grades of certain students really struggling on increased numbers over since we've been in this pandemic. And I'm just wondering, now that we're getting to almost halfway through this school year, you know, specifically in terms of those grades issues, it sounds like there's a lot of really good interventions which are focusing on a lot of the social emotional learning, which I think is, you know, critically important and a big part of this. What is there a plan to look at if those students need extra learning opportunities perhaps through the summer? I know, Dr. Mahan, you've talked about next year, you know, every year when students come into their new grade, they're always, students are at different levels, and, you know, that always is part of teaching. I just think, like, the numbers that we saw, you know, it's concerning to see the increases in students overall, kind of a lot of students struggling, a lot more than we had before. I'm just wondering, you know, where those ideas are going to generate from, and, you know, when that process gets started, I guess, not we, but the process gets started.
So those ideas start to generate at the building level to determine what would be the most appropriate interventions for students at the secondary schools. So I'm sure at some point you will hear additional conversations, particularly coming out of Carusi and West, for support, as they are both Title I schools. And I can't remember who asked the question, but what funds, Ms. Friedel, which funding are Oakland Public Schools using? So we honed in tonight on ESY and on campaign, because those are programs that have a history in the district and are developed. There are other programs that are building based that we have had over the years, but are not as structured as campaign and ESY. So as those plans come to fruition, we will absolutely share them with you.
And just as a follow-up, I understand that perhaps Cherry Hill High School East and Beck and Rosa are not Title I schools, but there was also, particularly at Beck and East, from what I remember from the data, there's also, you know, clear grade decreases there as well. So, you know, it sounds like there's good stuff going on at the building level. Are there any other opportunities that we might be looking towards for the schools that don't receive Title I funds?
Again, that's a conversation that has to start at the building level, and then ultimately involve the superintendent and myself and Mrs. Wethington to decide or to determine what are the most important needs. What are the needs that need to be addressed for our students? How would we be addressing them? What would be the cost for addressing those needs? And how would we staff those needs? So it's a much, you know, larger conversation. I do understand where you're going, but it would be beyond my purview this evening to speak to a plan that one of the schools when we're just, you know, the first quarter of the year is done.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other comments? Mrs. Stratton?
Just had a question because of course, I'm hearing all this stuff for the first time, but are we also finding that more parents are getting more involved? I know in the past we've had some low numbers in terms of parents coming to back to school nights and at some of the schools and actually attending conferences and whatnot. Is that a positive right now that maybe we're having more parents that are getting into that, and that are we somehow tracking it so that we can try to see post-pandemic if we can keep that going and it doesn't drop back down to the on the lower end side?
It was mentioned at the meeting specifically about conferences at the middle school level, and that's why they extended it from the traditional 1 week allotted to hold parent conferences to 3 weeks, because being in a virtual platform, more parents were able to attend. And the principal said that, they are looking at, how they can expand upon that, at least at the 4 parent conferences, going beyond this year when we get back into school full time. How can they, take that in relation to conferences? But Dr. Mahan could probably speak to, other areas as well. We just spoke about the conferences.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that that's really a perfect example. We have seen examples across the K-12 spectrum where the response from parents has been overwhelmingly positive, and parents have said, oh, we should keep this. We really like this. And that ranges from orientations to back to school nights to parent information nights on a variety of things. I'm interested to find out what the feedback is on the course of study videos and the town hall for course of study night on Thursday. So we are tracking. We do see the number of participants, but the most concrete and best example, I think, is for conferences. We definitely saw even an increase at the elementary school, everyone willing and ready and able to participate because they're in the comfort of their own homes. So we were asked early on if that is something that could remain for the 2021-2022 school year. So there are definitely some positive takeaways that we've planned to continue because they just increase overall parental involvement.
Always good to have positive takeaways.
Yeah, I love that we can find some bright spots there that we can, keep going post-pandemic, and especially in even the conferences. I know for me, I would be interested to see if even on the social emotional learning side, if even at the high school level and middle school level, I know there the conferences are a little bit different because they're not as required in the elementary side. So, for your learners that are meeting or exceeding, they don't often get that FaceTime with the teachers post middle school. And I wonder if maybe we can kind of use the conferences plus social emotional to even give them a chance to talk to teachers now. Because I know, I'll speak for just myself. I know I was one of those parents that was like, man, I really wish I could connect, even though my child is on the level where they need to be. But, and of course, this pandemic has been a great opportunity for me to find time to do that, and then be able to do it virtually from my house. And it's been really great. So I just feel like that's something we should jot down as let's find a way to incorporate or adapt to moving for the next school year.
Yeah. Good, thank you. Any others? Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So now that brings us to the business and facilities update, and I'll turn that over to Mrs. Schultz.
So our committee met January 5th. We met at 6 o'clock, and I was going to give an update, but I am happy to say that Mrs. Sugars is going to go through the presentation that she did for the committee with the entire board and the community, which I am extremely excited about. I do not think that I would be able to convey such an update. So I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Sugars to go through the wonderful presentation that she did. And it is just in regards to our capital project update. So I think it's going to be a really exciting update for the board and our community members just to see some of these great projects and where we are. And again, the pictures are far better than what I will be able to convey using just my update. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Schultz. And I'm going to ask Mr. Bart, who's on the meeting tonight, to interject where he needs to, because he actually helped put this presentation together. So we decided to do a project update for the B&F committee, just kind of let them know where we were with some of the capital projects that have been going on around in the district. We started with the East Wall project. This is a very large project that we have been working on for some time. We did this little diagram here so that you can see these sections, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these green boxes here are the areas where most of that work has been occurring. And that's a project that has been going on since the spring. So these are some of the conditions that we had found in that area. Windowsills separating away from the brick. Essentially the issue at East is the issue that we have found in many other sections of East, where the masonry wall, the cinder block wall, is not connected to the brick wall, or was connected at some point, and that connection has failed. So we're seeing a lot of this separation of windowsills. We're seeing cracking on the interior of the building. We can see here cracking in the corners. We can see windowsills here that are buckling. And so these were some of the conditions that needed to be addressed in those areas. So if we take a look here, this is the cafeteria courtyard. If you come into East in the front entrance and you make a right-hand turn, it's kind of opposite of the auditorium area. These are the before pictures, and these are the work in progress pictures here. You can see how nicely updated it is, the paneling. We've done some of this paneling wall work throughout other sections at East, and all of this windows will be updated, and that's in progress right now. You can see here kind of what that's going to look like once it's finished. And actually, we were able to add an additional picture from when we shared this information with the B&F committee, because since we met, we've had some additional work going on there. This area here is the exit out of the cafeteria into the courtyard. And these are the pictures that were taken today. So you can see that we have added in some of the glass and some new doors here. And we're pleased to see that project moving forward. It was good to see the glass come in. We were concerned at one point about the availability of materials. However, we seem to be moving right along with this project. So this picture was taken today, so that gives you a good, clear idea of what progress has been made in that area. As we look at some of the other areas, this is the connecting link that's here in that cafeteria area. This needed some heavy duty construction done in this section. You can see here, this is the previous picture. This wall here, if you stood and looked down, you could see where it was sort of leaning. And so this is work in progress here. In this picture, we have lots of structural work that's being done there in that section. And again, this was taken today, so we can see that we are now in that connecting link, starting to make some progress with the masonry wall being rebuilt. And again, we're excited to see that progress continue in that area. So this project hopefully will be completed by March. We do have in the cafeteria area, we're not serving lunches during the course of the day, but we do have a wall. Actually, I'm going to go back so you can see that, because you can actually see it in this picture here. You can see this wall that was built between the windows that are being replaced and the actual cafeteria. So there is a wall there that is separating the construction area from the cafeteria area. And so now this is the other section of the building where we have some classrooms. This is the before picture. This is the after picture of those classrooms. That work has been completed over in that courtyard area. This is an interior picture. We not only did exterior work, we also were able to rehab classrooms, the green boxes that I showed you in that diagram. And actually our staff, our B&G staff, did most of the rehab work in those classrooms. They did the flooring, they did the painting, they did the code base. We ordered new furniture. So we were able to really bring those classrooms up to speed and bring in some new materials. And I know that the teachers have been very pleased with the new furniture that we were able to get them. And just the whole atmosphere of those classrooms has changed since we were able to do this project. This is a computer lab, again, that we've been able to revamp. You can see back here some of the new furniture that was coming in. And down here is, as I like to call it, the Home Depot floor. We were able to remove the tile, and we have been using these machines we call diamond grinding machines to polish the concrete and give it a sheen. And so we were able to do that in those classrooms, which was very popular with some of the teachers over there. And so that was also work that our staff was able to do in that room. So you can see here that the back connecting link area that we had shown you, this is the previous picture, and this is the revised picture, certainly much cleaner, much more updated in that section there. And this is the interior view. You can see what it looked like before and how it looks now. It's bright, it's clean, it just looks fantastic. So hopefully at some point we could do either some videos or some tours or something so people can see how much nicer it looks and how dramatic it is. So here are some views from the second level. You can see here, this is the courtyard for the cafeteria. You can see our cafeteria tables out here. Our students do like to use that area. So we're getting that area done. And then this is the after picture for that same area. So it's an exciting project. I think it's really going to look great. This wall work that we're doing, the masonry that we're using is going to tie in, like I said, with some of the other areas that we have worked on throughout that building. And so this is the other courtyard. You can see the before and after for that as well. Moving on to our security suites. I know we had touched on some of these. We just wanted to highlight, we have finished the projects at East and West. And so here you can see the main entrance to East. We painted the pillars. We were able to replace the doors there. So you can see that work there. And then if you look at, if you've been in the building, which I know many people have not been, you can see what a dramatic difference it is. This is the picture before, and this is the picture with the new vestibule in place. And so now all traffic will come through this door over here and into this vestibule so that our visitors can be vetted, and then either things can be dropped off or, you know, if there's an appointment or that kind of a thing. We use the vestibule as kind of the holding area until those issues are resolved. So we're excited about that. Yep, that project done. This is an interior view of the vestibule and how that's going to look from the lobby. It really is a shame the pictures don't do it justice. It really looks great. And we're very excited about that project. And then switching over to Cherry Hill West, our main entrance here. Previously, this was the main entrance, but it was not handicapped accessible. So now we have our handicapped accessible ramp that has been put in. We put in the main entrance sign and we put the canopy above, you know, so people could stand there and be protected from the rain and things of that nature. We used kind of we liked this design because we were concerned that if this was a solid material, that it would make the vestibule very dark. So we selected this material to make sure that we could bring some light into the vestibule. And so this is the vestibule from the interior. It's a very large vestibule because we were able to remove these interior doors. And once we did that, we had a very nice sized vestibule there at West. So that's from one angle, and then you can see it from the other angle. It's a very, very nice space over there. And then this is what it looked like previously. And now we have this window here. So if people drop off lunch or sneakers or a project, the student can come to this window here pick up whatever they need to pick up. And then the vestible's over here. Just to update on a couple other things, as you know, we used some of our Alyssa's Law money, and we decided to take that money and complete the security camera, the swipe card access system for staff, the interior and exterior strobe lights, and the exterior door sensor system, which alerts us if a door is left open for a extended period of time. We already had all of those items in East, West, Berkeley, Woodcrest, and Payne because we had done it as part of the vestibule projects. Currently, we have it completed installation at Beck, Rosa, and this building here, the alternative high school / Malberg building. Currently, we are underway with Barton, Knight, and Kilmer. And then the remaining schools should have all that work done by March 31st. So we're excited to get that work done throughout the district, and very excited that we have some grant money to help pay for that part of that project. We also touched on roof leaks. We talk a lot about roofs, not only at BNF, but also strategic planning. It's one of the things that is on the high priority list in terms of when we move forward with bond referendum. Our roofs are coming out of warranty, lots of areas throughout the district that need to be repaired. I think Mr. Bart said during the meeting that 14 of our schools have current roof leaks. We have a contractor that we work with to patch and to try to address them, but in some areas we're just getting to the point where patches and Band-Aids are just not working anymore. So just wanted to touch base on that and what that looks like throughout the district. Here's some additional areas where we can see that we need to address both exterior and interior issues. The East tennis courts have been offline for some time. We touched base on this as well. There was some damage to the courts in the spring after a storm had come through. It separated the surface from the concrete underneath of the surface, and that's when we discovered there was some extended cracking there as well. At this point, we are working with our insurance company. They are reaching out to the township's insurance company. The tennis courts are on our property, but the township maintains them. And so unfortunately, we've had sort of a long drawn out process of insurance companies trying to figure out who's responsible for what and who's going to pay for the repairs. We're hoping to have some resolution to that soon so that we can get that work up and running. Unfortunately, they've been offline for some time, and we're hoping that we can get that resolved and move forward with that project as well. We have the specs, had our engineer come out and look at it. We've had a contractor come out and look at it. So once we get the kind of know what our plan is, we can move ahead with that project as well. And here's some additional pictures of that. So in terms of the ADA projects that we slated for this year, which was West and Woodcrest, the specs are in the process of being developed. We actually received them yesterday. I forwarded them on to our architect and our folks here that need to take a look at those. We need to review those. We're hoping to advertise for bids in early February and award bids in late February. And then the work on those projects will depend on when we get our approval from DOE. And also, what does it look like if we have students in district? If we don't have students in district, you know, when will we be able to complete that work? I expect more than likely that this will be a summer project. It'll probably start late spring and then go into the summer. But you know, moving ahead with those projects. Also, the Stockton roofing project. Stockton is one of our roofs that are in pretty bad shape. We were able to address Man last year, 2 years ago, and now Stockton is next on the list. They're completing their analysis. There's a certain amount of rooftop unit work, exhaust fan work that needs to be part of this project. So their mechanical engineer is looking at those types of things and finalizing their analysis. We hope to have a schedule very soon. We expect that this project will be done over the summer and completed in time for school to start in September. And that's it. One thing I wanted to add, Mrs. Schultz, if I may. It was brought to my attention during the BNF meeting that there seems to be some opinion among the public that our buildings and ground staff is not doing a whole lot while our buildings are empty. So I asked Mr. McCarty, who is our Director of Facilities, to provide me with a list of all the things that we have been doing. And I can assure you it is an extensive list. If there's been any advantage to not having students, it's been that we have been able to move ahead with some of these projects and get them completed rather quickly. In each building, we have done some ceiling tile replacement, lighting replacement. We've done a lot of diamond grinding of the floors, which is a process that we use on our terrazzo floors. It means that we use special machinery that shines the floor. We don't have to use wax. We don't have to use stripper. You do it once and then you just have to buff it, every couple of years. It looks great. The floors are literally shining. So they've been able to do a lot of that in our buildings. They've been able to do a lot of painting in our buildings. We've been able to revamp all of our custodial closets. We stripped them, we painted them, we put new shelving in, we got them organized because we are, been in a mode of making sure that we're doing extra cleaning and sanitizing and things like that. So we cleaned all our custodial closets up. We've been replacing some of our water fountains with water bottle fillers. We've done quite an extensive amount of landscaping. If you have been past some of our buildings, you can see that we have been concentrating on the entrances. We've been able to do a lot of tree and shrub removal, put mulch in, and do a lot of landscaping as well. So I can assure you that our B&G staff has been working very hard. We've been working in almost every building. And they have been trying to complete some of these projects while we have the opportunity to do that. So that's it.
Thank you. And thanks so much for showing the presentation to the whole board. I think it was extremely beneficial versus my readout that I would typically do. One other thing, I just wanted to point out that I had in my notes, please correct me if I am conveying this incorrectly, that you had discussed with the board too, that I believe it's the light replacements, that we are doing a lot of light replacements and the district is taking advantage of high efficiency rebates, and that we keep processing the rebates for our high efficiency lights on these grants, and we're recycling the money and applying for grants, and that's how we're replacing so many lights in the district. So I hope I'm conveying that properly, but I did want to make sure that we pointed that out because that was a question that was raised in our committee, and I thought that was really important to also relate to the rest of the board, that we are taking advantage of the high efficiency grants, and I believe it was the lights.
It is lights, they're not actually grants, they're rebates. So we receive rebates on the lighting and we're able just to roll that into the purchase of additional lighting. And so that's one of the projects that our staff has been able to do extensively throughout our buildings. We're concentrating on hallways right now. And then at some point, we'll be able to go back and start working on classrooms.
Perfect. And then that was one of the notes I had. I thought that was a really good note. And then I think we'd also talked about possibly putting some of the pictures up on the website so that the community members can go back. Is that something that we're still looking at doing?
Yes, we'll put Mrs. Sugar's presentation up on the website.
Okay.
It'll get uploaded tomorrow.
Okay, perfect. And then I wanted to turn it over to my peers who are also on the committee to see if they had anything to add. But before I do, I also wanted to just extend my overall thanks and appreciation to our buildings and ground staff as well. Before you had done the presentation, I just didn't realize how much work that department had been doing in our buildings, and I just was really overwhelmed by just seeing the pictures and the painting and just even that small work in each. So I just personally want to give my thanks and appreciation. I know that team is doing an overwhelming amount of work in our buildings during this time. So I would just like to say thank you.
They have been, and they really have been, since this started back in March, coming to work almost every day. We furloughed some of our custodial staff, our nighttime custodial staff for a little while, but as soon as we were able to bring everybody back, they really have been in these buildings working around the clock.
So I think Kim or Sally, before we open up to the rest of the board, anything we missed or any comments from committee members?
No, Ruth, I just wanted to make sure the rebate and the high efficiency lighting was mentioned and you got that.
I think that was your question, I believe. Yeah. Mrs. Tong, any questions or questions from other board members?
Can I just, before we move on, can Mrs. Sugars make a very brief but exciting announcement, because you mentioned the word grant?
Oh, yeah.
That we found out about late this afternoon.
Yes, I'm very pleased to announce that we just found out this afternoon that we have been awarded a National School Lunch Program Equipment Assistance Grant that we had applied for in December in the amount of $92,734.95. And this will allow us to replace some equipment at the 2 high schools and the 3 middle schools. We were permitted to apply for $100,000 per district and $20,000 per location. And so we never dreamed that we would get all of the equipment that we requested. We requested some items such as combi ovens, refrigerators, warming trays, and proofing trays. And so we were very excited to get that email this afternoon to find out that we have been awarded that grant. So very happy about that.
So kudos to Mrs. Sugars and her team,
Congratulations.
to Mr. Bridges and the Aramark team who participated in constructing the grant. It was a lot of work, a lot of legwork going into it, but very exciting. So kudos to Mrs. Sugars and the group.
And I think before that wonderful announcement, I think Mrs. Neary had a question.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Just 2 questions. For the wall at East, or the 2 walls that have been rebuilt, did they say what the root cause was? Have they been able to remedy that now that they've rebuilt it?
Yeah, the root cause, I think, is basically, original construction. When the building was originally constructed, it was not necessarily done, it was done very cheaply from what I understand, but not necessarily very well. So as we have seen, this has been an issue throughout several sections of East that we've now had to go back and address.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then for the ADA work that's mentioned in that presentation, is that in line with the prioritization that ERI had provided from back in the summer, or is that work is already in progress?
That is, when we had spoken about those issues, and they had provided us with a prioritized list, and West and Woodcrest were the 2 buildings that were on the top of that list. We're now going back and looking at that list to decide what to tackle, with next year's budget, next year's funding. But yes, those 2 items were on the top of the list. We contracted with ERI to design the specifications. They've been doing that work, and as I said, we just received them yesterday. We'll move forward with those as quickly as we have some time to review them.
Great, thank you. That's all I had.
And Mrs. Stern, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you so much, Mrs. Schultz. Just a few quick questions, and also just a real kudos on both the grant front. That's $92,000 that doesn't need now to come from taxpayers' pockets, which is fantastic. It's really great to hear. So congratulations, it's impressive. And also just really want to, we talk about kind of trying to look for silver linings during this really tough time. And I think, it's really great to see the district taking real advantage of so few people in the building and getting so much work that's, needs to be done. And, I know as a parent, we kind of used to, go to the schools, my kids were little, and look at the walls and, the paint that's been the same paint for 20 years. And, it's just nice to hear that that's getting done now, and what a great, way to kind of make lemonade out of lemons. So just a few quick questions. Do we have the total projected cost of the East Wall project that you went through?
The particular project that we're working on right now?
Correct. The one that started in March, or you anticipate will be completed in March, it started in the spring, the one that you highlighted.
Yes, that project was originally awarded at $4.7 million. And we added some additional work to that project of approximately $400,000. So the total for that project right now is $5,149,000.
Okay. Just 2 more quick questions. Given that wall work, I know there's been a lot of work on walls at East prior to this, approximately at this point, what percentage of the building have the walls needed to be replaced so far?
I would say probably about 40% of the building has been replaced at this point. We've done, I mean, I don't know what, I know some work was done before I started here, but since I've been here, we've done the auditorium, we've done the operational area, the boiler room area, and we've done this project as well as the back end of the building was done as well. So 40, maybe even 50% of the building at this point has been completed.
Okay, and just a quick follow-up to that, Mrs. Sugars. Given that this was identified, these were clearly identified in the pictures as failure, you know, wall failures. Are there other walls at the current time that have not been replaced, but you have also identified similarly that you're seeing right now at this moment that have this similar failures or that anticipate are going to need to be replaced?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have been discussing in terms of bond referendum for the F-wing section of the building, which also needs to be addressed. You know, we've been talking about maybe taking a different approach with that building than we have with some of the other sections. But yes, there are other areas of the building that still need to be addressed.
Okay, and just last quick question. The vestibules are, you know, definitely a huge shift and change and provide security. Are those vestibules going to be the entrance areas now for all the students in both West and East?
Not for the students, not for the morning, you know, when students are coming in the morning. If a student comes in late, they would come in through that entrance. Any visitors to the building would come in through that entrance. Deliveries, those kinds of things would come through that entrance.
Okay. Okay, thank you so much.
Mrs. Stern, there are a set number of entrances for students during the course of the academic day that are monitored by staff. That changed as part of our district security plan under Mr. Saporito's guidance a few years ago. There was a time 10 years ago where every door on the building would be unlocked. That doesn't happen anymore. There are set numbers, staff supervision, combination of campus police, security, certificated, non-certificated staff, and the administrators. And then once the academic day begins, that first bell, doors are closed, the building's secured. As Ms. Sugar says, after that, the kids would come through the vestibule if they arrive late to school.
Thank you, Dr. Malash.
Mr. Vadia.
Yeah, so just a few comments. First of all, how exciting to have a grant on Board of Ed Day. Congratulations to you and your team. The Alyssa Law money grants being used the way you described, awesome. The work, I mean, just the aesthetics of the work is fantastic. The only other thing I wanted to add is, you know, as we know, Bob Garrison works in dozens of districts. He's been very complimentary of the work that, you know, that your team's done in terms of replacing the lighting. And I think people should know that we're talking about millions of dollars as well. So I think sometimes people think, you know, alternative funding is like an island, you know, that we need to get to. But I think what we're demonstrating is baked into the work that you all are doing as an administrative team. There's a lot going on. You know, it's great to of course celebrate this stuff, but when we add the three things, you know, we're talking about $1.5 million, whatever it is, it's a lot. And so we're not here for the taxpayers per se, but it's always good to be good stewards. And of course, obviously the students are benefiting. So appreciate that work. Thank you.
Don't see any other questions, so I will just end with our next meeting is February 2nd, and the BNF, we meet at 6 p.m. That is it. And Ms. Deary, I can just quickly comment on HR. We did not have a
Perfect.
meeting. So there was no meeting due to our board reorganization, so there is nothing to report on. And HR, our next meeting is also February 2nd at 5 p.m. So we will get back on our regularly scheduled update at our following February board meeting.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you. So then that brings us to policy and legislation, and I'll turn that over to Ms. Friedel.
Thank you. So let me just start by saying that P&L met on January 4th, and joining us at this meeting, we were able to invite our student reps. 2 of the 4 were able to join us. That would have been Aubrey Demorgian. I hope I said her name properly. And Alex Turley. So Aubrey from East and Alex from West. So we wanted them to be part of the conversation as we were talking about security and our policies related to security. So we've had the opportunity to have cultural proficiency do a few presentations to the board. We also extended the invitation to the student reps to be part of the conversation. So I will say, to start, there was one legislative update, and that was that the governor signed the QSAC legislation, which deferred the process for at least 1 year. So we were scheduled for the QSAC visit on February 1st, 2021. We will defer that visit. At the time of our P&L meeting, we weren't sure if it was going to be deferred to 2022 or 2023. I don't know, Dr. Malash, has that been determined yet?
It has, Ms. Friedel. Yes, thank you for asking. Because we are a high-performing district and we were high-performing the last time we had the QSAC review, we will not receive the full QSAC review until 2023-24 academic year. We just recently found out, so we have that update.
Great. Thank you for sharing the update. We also had a very brief conversation about the COVID vaccine, and Dr. Malash shared that our teachers, our staff are, in line for getting the vaccine, but there will not be a mandate from the district that that the staff must get a vaccination. That will be individual choice. Okay. Next on our agenda, we're reviewing school security policies, and Mr. Saporito was able to join us that evening for the discussion. I will mention just for historical purposes that Mr. Saporito, in the 25-year history, he is the second director of school security. We've only had 2. So the first director was here for, I think, over 20 years or about 20 years.
Yes.
And then Mr. Saporito joined the district. One of the things that the committee had asked Mr. Saporito to share, and Dr. Malash, obviously, to share with us was some data on the school security program. So I'm going to share some numbers with you. I'll try to speak a little slower than I normally do since I'm sharing numbers. But from September 2018 to June 2020, and of course, we have to remember that from March to June, the buildings were closed. School was happening remotely, but the buildings were closed. So from September 2018 to June 2020, there were 82 total arrests in the district.
There were 54.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, Dr. Malesh. There were 54 arrests with 82 charges.
Charges. Correct.
Right. So one individual may have had 3 charges.
Correct.
Okay. We did ask for the breakdown of the demographics of the students. There were 27 white students, Caucasian students. There were 12 African-American students. There were 9 Hispanic students, and there were 6 Asian students. When we look at the percentage, so the 27 white students were 50% of the arrest. And our white Caucasian students make up 56% of our population. The 12 African-American students that were arrested were 22% of the arrest, and that the African-American students are 8% of our population. The 9 Hispanic students constitute 17% of the arrest, and they make up 13% of our population. And the 6 Asian students were 11% of the total arrest, and they make up, the Asian population is 17%. So one of the things that did stand out to us was that in the arrest, the African-American students make up 8% of our population, but were 22% of the arrest. So there was a disproportionate amount of arrest in that population. It was not so dramatic in the other categories. The arrest, and Dr. Malash, I'm going to lean into you a little bit for this. I was taking notes, but I was so engaged in the conversation, or my other committee members. Only 2 of the arrests resulted in students actually being handcuffed. So most arrests that happen are not happening where we think about, you know, a TV show or an out of school situation. It's not students, not the officers going into classrooms and pulling out handcuffs and putting children under arrest. It is done more privately, and only 2 required handcuffs being used.
And yes, and Ms. Fidel, end up being handcuffed are children, or if they're 18, adults who are being transported to the Cherry Hill Police Department.
Thank you. Thank you.
It's done, when arrests take place, it's something that is done incredibly discreetly. Remember, our goal as a school district is not to introduce children into the criminal justice system. Unfortunately, there are times when presented with certain situations, children in possession of certain items, that becomes unavoidable.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for jumping in, Dr. Malash. Some of the perspectives of the students, they mentioned that, you know, at West, there is one particular corridor, the DEF wing, which is a huge intersection at Cherry Hill West for anyone who isn't familiar, that they do see fights that break out there. But the students said that the officers are always there, and they're always, you know, keeping the students safe. We were talking too about the fact that we have armed officers also in the elementary and middle schools. And actually the one student was surprised to hear that we had armed officers in our younger grades. They both, paraphrasing, saw more of a need at a high school level. It made more sense than at the lower grades. I will say one of the comments by the students that Dr. Malash and Mr. Saporito may want to look into was one of the students said that students carry self-defense items with them at times. So that was a little bit concerning, that we may want to look a little bit into. We did talk about the mental health components of school security. It was noted that every elementary school has a full-time counselor, there is an ESS program, and it has been expanded where it's at the high schools, 1 middle school and 1 elementary school, and that the district has a psychiatrist that they contract with to work with students. I'm sorry, that's my puppy. So one of the things, and we did really kind of run out of time. I feel like we probably should continue some of this dialogue if we can at another BNF or P&L meeting. I've got all my meetings confused. Because we really did run out of time. But I think we kind of need to look at that data that was presented, and looking at the equity lens, because that's what we need to do, is make sure that our policies are equitable and are appropriate for all of our population. So I personally think we should continue that conversation. We then very quickly tried to go through the first readings, but hopefully you were able to review the different first readings. There was one on, hold on, I'm sorry. Athletic competition, emergency seizure plan, school district security, and emergency and crisis situations. You all would have received those in your packet. I'm not sure if you have any questions or comments. And then we had a list of policies that came to us and they were really read at first level at other committees. So there was the administration employment contract, the cooperative purchasing, the property inventory, the use of school facilities, and the procurement procedures for school nutrition program. And we ended the meeting. Committee members, is there any information that I left out that you would like to expand on?
Ben has his hand up.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Fridella, that's a great reading. I think one thing when we looked at the data was, and I apologize if you said this, but the male-female breakdown of arrests was quite heavily skewed to male. I don't think we got to a place in the meeting where we had causation, but there's certainly correlation to be looked at. And so I think you had made that observation, but I just want to make sure that in looking at that data, that really did jump out at me.
Thank you, Mr. Abadi. I had actually talked about the data based on the racial demographics. I did not discuss the male-female. Rosie, Ms. Arroyo?
And just putting out there that most of what the arrests were attached to were nonviolent offenses. And so just to keep in mind, when you attach armed officers in school settings, which was one of the things that Mr. Goodwin brought up Mr. Goodwin has brought up in the past, and we kind of briefly touched on it. If violent offenses are down or violent interactions within youth are down, what is the reasoning behind having armed officers in the schools? And I think one of the comments that were brought up, I could be wrong if it was at the last meeting or a previous one, was that the fact that armed officers have been in school settings in other situations like the Parkland incident, and how that impacted and what that actually meant and caused. So I'm just bringing up that piece of the conversation because a lot of it was around armed police officers in the schools and how that impacts youth of color. And then what does that look like with the arrest rate? So you have to connect all these pieces together as we're looking at some of this data and looking at both the benefits of having armed officers and the negative consequences of having armed officers in the school, and who is it really impacting the most, and what do we do about it, right? So it's not just looking at the data; it's how you're going to utilize it to implement policies. And what I did mention at that meeting was we were in a very different place in time, and when that was implemented. Current climate, youth voice, the strength and power of the social justice movement within the school district. Our students are telling us one thing, and we need to listen to that. And I think part of that is revisiting that policy on armed officers, whether or not we keep it, that'll be part of the conversation. But I think we're in a completely different place right now, and we should be able to reevaluate that.
Thank you, Ms. Arroyo. Mrs. Neary?
Thank you. So looking at that, so two questions. One, we're looking at 22% of the arrests for 8% of the population. It's a really troubling disparity. So how are we digging, or what are we doing, like digging into that? Is the committee getting further information on that to try and understand where that's coming from, right? And then we looked at across racial groups, right, for that information. And then Mr. Avadia brought up, looking at that across gender. Have we looked at, and I think we should, how many of these students are identified with special needs that we're introducing into, possibly introducing into the criminal justice system? So like, is that a layer that we're looking at? Because that's that's of concern as well. And I don't know that anybody's speaking for those students. So those two things, was there discussion on?
Lori, can I just add that the data that was shared with us was 2018 to 2020. The Cherry Hill School District did implement restorative programming within some of their schools, and so we're not going to see the outcomes of that program until maybe next year when or when we're back into in-person, full in-person programming. So that is going to impact those arrest rates, right? Because that was like the purpose of when they presented that programming to us. But we have to still see, like, if that is a positive outcome, what does that look like for the rest of our district to implement a similar work, right? But I don't want it to be I know some of the age group too. There was some youth between the age of 18 to 21 that had some involvement. And I also want to point out and be clear, because I think we asked this question because they go through very thorough training. There's a lot of diversion work happening within the school district and within the Cherry Hill School District Police Department. But a piece of what they're incorporating is having the discussions around what does this look like moving forward, and how are these restorative practices being built into the rest of what we're looking at. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it will change within the next school year, I'm assuming, once things are fully implemented again.
Thank you. I just want to make sure, because it's hard to see. Mrs. Schultz, you don't have any questions?
I do, but Mrs. Stratton had a question. So
Oh,
she was
I'm
before
sorry,
me.
I didn't see your hand, Mrs. Stratton.
No worries, and thank you, Ruth. I was gonna ask, actually, Rosie touched on a few of the questions I had, but just reiterating that the dates that the data was tracked was 2018 to 2020. And we've already have practices in place that are addressing that data that was presented to us. So we already have some programs that we're currently working on that we can have some results on to look at the end of, I guess, for this school year, Rosie, or would that be in the next school year? The next one. Okay.
I think that was the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just in terms of those stats, my other question was going to be, what were our next steps? So I'm glad that we already have some of those diversionary activities already in place. But are we also digging deeper into that data? I know that the county does their own data tracking, but as a district, are we digging any deeper in terms of looking at the age groups, looking at if these are students with a repeated history, or if they're first time involvement? And then my other question was pertaining to what were some of the offenses that is, so that we can look at what type of programming might specifically address those specific offenses if there's a high rate of one or the other. So do we have someone in our district that looks at that specifically, that's looking at all these things, or is it something that we will look at as a board, or what's our movement on that?
Sure. So I can share that Mr. Saporito and Dr. Malash did share a chart of what the arrests were, if it was assault, if it was theft or what have you. So Dr. Malash, can that be shared with the entire board?
I can put it in the confidential file this weekend.
Okay, that would be helpful.
Yes.
My thoughts on this are that this is such a critical issue that P&L needs to go back and look at more data and really dive deeper, as you just said, so that we really are making an informed, having an informed conversation and potentially any decisions where we've really looked at as much data as we can to make the right choices.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially if we're going to be hearing about, I would be interested to hear if the programming that we put in place, I know it's probably on pause because of pandemic, but if, where they are in terms of their outcomes, are they making any headway? Mm-hmm. And to Rosie's point of, is this replicable, or, can we do this again in the areas that are some of our areas of concern around the district? And then the last thing is, I know that these stats are collected and looked at across the county in terms of us with other districts of our size, are we low on, are we doing, as well as maybe some of the other districts are doing? Are we, way under, like where are we measuring up? And not so that I can, walk away from this feeling good, like, oh, but Cherry Hills, we're not the -- 1 at that. But more or less so that we can look at if there's a district that's of our size that has some of the comparable numbers and maybe they're achieving in these, they're not achieving, doing better, addressing these issues than we are. Can we know what those districts are? So maybe we can do some research and maybe reach out and see what they're doing that's been a promising practice that could be applied here.
I think that's a great suggestion. I am not familiar enough to answer. Dr. Malash, are we able to get some comparable data?
So the challenge always becomes for us to find a district of comparable size. There's no district of comparable size, outside of Toms River, unless you go into, again, we're the 11th largest district in the state. The one that's closest in size to us is Camden. So we can certainly compare with Camden City and see what arrests look like, coming out of Camden Public Schools. The next district that's closest in size is Gloucester Township, which is a K-8. Traditionally, you're going to see a different impact in arrests just because of problems that are associated with older children that aren't necessarily associated with younger children. Of those 54 arrests, the majority, if not all 54, then we believe 53 of the 54 came from the high schools. So we can certainly talk to some of the local districts that have high schools, again, of comparable size, right? So that's really the biggest challenge, is to look at that. And then I have to see what's available in terms of arrest. Also remember that arrest is not necessarily predicated on something that the school chose to do. That also involves the filing of charges by parents who make a complaint, or by an individual staff member, or by another child, that's there. Our campus police officers, regardless of the level at which they work, are not involved in student discipline. That's not their role. That's not their function. It would be the same if they were an SRO hired from a municipal police department. But we can certainly find some of that data. I'm not sure, and I can go through with Mr. Saporito, but I'm not sure how far the Cherry Hill Police Department can dig down into the individual arrest records, or how much else can be shared, other than the age and the ethnicity and gender of the child and the charges, because they are children. You know what I mean, in terms of what's there. But yeah, we can absolutely see what else is available to talk about. In terms of, Strad, you're asking about some of the programs or sort of the justice practices that are being put into place. The hard part about it is we haven't had kids in school in 10 months, to go through. I shared with the board today, the Cherry Hill Sun published an article that Dr. Morton submitted regarding a grant that was awarded to Cherry Hill Police Department and Cherry Hill High School West for some of the ongoing work that's taken place there, and what takes place. So we will take a look and see what else that we can find. We got in the central Jersey, take a look at like an Edison School District or a Hamilton Township, places like that, to see what we can get in terms of arrest records that are there. I just am not sure how much we'll be able to get.
Yeah, I'm sure there's layers to it, and I just asked just because I'm again seeing that we're not going to be the only district that's going through this. So why not seek and see what some other people have done to address it. And I know that, most of those programs that are restorative justice, that are diversionary, that are even preventionary, they're all going to be tracking some of these questions for us. And it's a matter of us asking how much privilege we have to see that, to find out if the students that are having consistent interactions with the justice system are students that have a history of it, or students that have some other trauma impacting things that might be leading to those things. because that's where we're really going to have to do the work in terms of figuring out what programs and things they need, not just addressing the arrest itself, but what's the back end. And I know that's a whole heck of a lot for a district to be looking at, but that's why we're all here, to be able to point in directions of different partners or things that possibly could take some of that pressure off administratively, but also address some of the outcomes that we really need for our young people. And I think that was all of my questions. I think I'm good. If I think of anything else, I'll just ask later. Sorry.
Thank you very much. Ms. Schultz?
Yeah, thank you. So just very quickly, more of a clarification. Kim, I think you kind of had alluded to it earlier. It sounds like there was a lot of discussion and really good discussion. So is the kind of next steps and go forward for the P&L committee to continue? Sounds like there's a lot more discussion that you're going to have on the topic. And then I pulled up the meeting agenda notes, and it looks like it's policy 7440, policy 8420, and policy 8469. Are those the three policies that I guess the committee will then come back to the full board and make a recommendation that I guess we as other board members need to kind of pull up and review? Because if I understood, they don't necessarily need any type of a revision. These were just brought to the committee because some board members had concerns about armed officers in the building. So I just want to make sure that we're kind of we're reviewing the right policies, and then P&L will have the necessary conversation, fact finding, and then your plan is to then make the recommendation to the board when that's appropriate.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Stern?
And just echoing Mrs. Arroyo and Mrs. Elmore Stratton, I think the restorative justice practices are so critical. And I'm actually wondering, I know that West has had them for some time. Is there a timeline for our other schools, middle and high school and middle schools? Are they already being formally practiced at the other schools, or is there a timeline for them to be brought online? As a parent, I can say firsthand that those practices are vital to kind of helping the trajectory of some of our students, and including our students with special needs, as Mrs. Neary referenced. So that was one question I had.
Okay, so I was going to say that I'm going to turn to Dr. Malash to address that, because that did not come up in our conversation.
So we have had staff members at all three levels trained in restorative practices. It's something that we've looked at as a district over probably the last 5 or 6 years. There are some practices that have been in place at all three levels. West is really the one that has done the first large scale implementation. And again, through grant work with the police department, and as a Title I school-wide program in order to provide the training. There was discussion of expanding that and training in additional schools. That transition, as we again closed schools in the beginning of March last year, and affected what we were planning in that realm in terms of training in the spring and the summer and into this year. It will be ongoing discussion with the administrative team and with the schools. Again, Dr. Morton and the team at West can go into a great deal more detail about the trainings that they provided for staff, what that looks like, because again, when you look at campus police or you look at arrests that occur in schools, rarely, if ever, are they related to a campus police officer patrolling a hallway or going down somewhere, right? It's because of a referral from a staff member, because of an altercation with another child, it's because of a parental phone call or somebody else coming in when it's related to theft. When you look and you'll see the numbers when they come through, the biggest area related to arrest deals with possession of a controlled substance, possession of paraphernalia, and distribution of a controlled substance. There's assaults and the altercations, theft, things like that are included as well. But that's more because of what else is going on in the school. So those questions become, especially in restorative practice, so what does it look like between interaction with staff and on a daily basis with what goes on in the schools? Like I said, Dr. Morton and the team can certainly go into greater detail about some of the specifics with what they've done, what they've seen. The analysis of student discipline data, and then the parallel piece, which would involve arrest and the involvement of campus police, is done at the building level and at the district level. That occurs every year in terms of what we look at. And the numbers, listen, we don't want to see any students arrested. Like I say, our role as a public school district is not to introduce children into the criminal justice system. I'm excited with what Camden County prosecutor is doing in terms of looking at station house adjustment, in terms of that as a diversionary program and expanding with station house adjustment. That can only be done with the approval of the Camden County prosecutor's office. So the prosecutor's office is directly involved in any arrest and any charge that may occur with a high school student. And then the final piece is, as we look at it, is the reality there's a little bit, right around 6,000 is a round number of students in the secondary schools. So if you look at 2 years worth of data or 12,000 students, 364 days of school. Like I said, one arrest would be too many. When you look at 54 during that time period, even if you take the 3 months at the end of the year off, again, there's always improvement that can be made. Who's being referred, who's impacted, and what those numbers. When you look at the big picture of the number of students here over the course of that time, I think that there are absolutely programmatic things that are working in our schools for the avoidance, and again, for those diversionary pieces to keep students, to support students in making good choices as opposed to making poor choices.
And I think,
Oh, go ahead.
so it's hard on this platform. Yeah, I mean, I think along those lines, I think, again, referring back to what Mrs. Arroyo said, times have really changed. There are so many, I think, kind of aspects that intersect around this issue, obviously about social justice and really looking at our whole approach with policing and, kind of our lens with racism. I think looking at, more the diversionary piece about addressing social emotional issues, what's going on, are there challenges, trauma issues going on at home? All those pieces they're so critical. And I think on a larger level, these same questions are being asked. So, I mean, I think it's so great to see our district really trying to kind of shift our approach and really take a hard look at this. And just one more thought, given that most of this is happening, I guess all of it at the high school level, perhaps looking at regionalized high school districts that might end up being similar comparable size into our high school population. Maybe that's another option in terms of comparison. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tong.
Hi, Kim. Thank you for the time. I have 2 questions. Out of the 52 arrests, what are the grade levels? I guess breaking down the grade level. And also, I'm not sure if this is a question, this is something I should ask regarding vaping. Is that also something someone can get arrested for vaping or not necessary?
I don't believe that vaping was on the list of reasons for arrest.
Okay.
And I believe, Sally, Ms. Tong, that of the total, all of the arrest or maybe just one was at the high school level. So almost all of them were at the high school level. One may have been at the middle school.
Yes.
Dr. Malash, I believe that was what was shared.
Yes, Ms. Friedel, that's what Mr. Saporito told us. This time, there were none of the arrests that were on there were specifically for vaping. There may have been some that were related to vaping, depending upon the substance and the possession of what a child had that was related to the vaping, but not for vaping specifically or for smoking, all that kind of stuff.
Oh, okay. And I think someone asked about the special needs. I'm not exactly the word to use, but special, special needed student. Do we have a percentage for that was being that the students notice?
I don't know. I'll talk with Mr. Sappert and find out. My honest answer right now is I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised. I do thank
Mr.
you all.
Kim, Mr. Avadia?
Oh, sorry, Mr. Avadia.
No, that's okay. I had second thoughts, then I had third thoughts. I think one thing for the board to consider and to think about as we chunk this out is the role of student voice. And I say that because when I think about, cultural proficiency brought a group of students before, and when I think about their grievances, it's a lot more centered in discipline and what happens in the schools versus what happens once it gets to this police level. And one of the things that I noted at the committee level is we really don't have good data when it comes to that student voice, aggregating that out and figuring out what that looks like. And I'm sure there are privacy, issues and such like that. So I would look to administration maybe to give us some guidance in terms of what we can get. But one of the things, for instance, arrest records wouldn't show us is if there's a feeling of discomfort that causes people to not be able to focus on their academics. That wouldn't show up in arrest records. For that, at some point, we do need to turn to student voice. And when I think about the grievances, at least that have been, that I recall most directly, I know one was a middle school student talking about curricular issues and how the continent of Africa is depicted. I know we've talked about being on par with your peers and not being recommended for AP or honors. I know we've talked about disparate dress code enforcement. And so I'd love to see the students, just our primary constituency, be able to direct some of what we do, because this is it's a large and worthwhile venture, but we have to be grounded in, I think, the biggest issues as seen from students. And maybe that's students at the high school level, maybe it's secondary and high school, I don't know, but I would just submit that I think there's some scaffolding that I think would be beneficial. I have no idea how to go from there, but I just wanted to mention that police officers are not involved in discipline. A lot of the grievances have to do with discipline. It's just an issue of what's the system, how do we feel, how do we get our arms around the most pressing issues, because in one sense, if we go back to the strategic vision goals, social, emotional, health, learning, and comfort, that's one of our primary 3 pillars. So this is absolutely critical, but it's critical to get the scaffolding, I believe, right as well. So I just submit that for consideration.
Can I just add, and Ben, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I think that student voice, and as somebody who we've done a lot with student voice through the years and talk a lot about it, it's always critical to define student voice as a collective and as that large SV, and student voice of a student's voice. It's like when we talk about the community, often we will talk about, that, well, the community wants, because we hear from people, we always try to clarify, well, it's actually members of the community, right? So there are students, and do we pull all the students to get that collective voice to get together? Do we get that bigger piece? I think always having students be able to participate in a discussion, just like we do. Kids are going to bring their own perspective, which is what we want to hear. And we need to take that as a piece of that information, to go through, whether it's in this area, in books that we're selecting, and again, use the kids that, that presented in December, which did such a phenomenal job over the course of that evening on the 22nd, organized, put it together. This is what they want to present. This is what they wanted to share, which I think lends that true value, in terms of what we ask for, or in terms of what we receive. We just always need to make sure, that what we are looking for, that we are actually, what we're asking for is what we're getting, and that we're asking for enough, to go. That hard part with the board, anytime that it comes to defining policy, is that reality of 11,000 students, right? We're making decisions, we're writing things. What's that impact overall? The equity lens that we talk about is so critical to help focus our vision, when we go through. But I think you bring up some very important and very salient points, for what we will continue to have as we move forward in discussion.
Okay, any other comments? I do thank everyone for this thoughtful discussion. Mrs. Neary, we can move forward.
Yes, thank you. That was great. So that now brings us to strategic planning, and I will turn that to Mr. Ovadia for his update.
Thank you, Mrs. Neary. So after the reorganization meeting, we met on Tuesday, January 5th for strategic planning. And we had about 5 things we covered, many excellent opinions of invited guests. So we start with an invited guest, Mr. John Cohen, principal at Woodcrest, to begin a discussion on the security plan. Mr. Cohen was part of the district's ad hoc safety and security committee. He has at his school an installed security vestibule. This is at Woodcrest. And he believes, he gave us essentially a testimonial, talked about what on the ground it looks like to have a vestibule in the school. He talked about the fact that when you build a new school, the state requires that they have a vestibule, that there's target hardening, that this is a best practice. He spoke about engagement with visitors, being better than an intercom system, easier to vet vestibules in the vestibule, easier to avoid door holding, which works against security at times. He spoke about a panic button feature that was installed and how that's been a plus. He stated you don't know sometimes if it's a threat until you vetted it or sometimes it's in the building. That another benefit is that the school has maintained an accurate visitors log, that it's been good through COVID and the guidelines imposed there by limiting visitors and movement. Tony Saporito, our director of security, could not have agreed more, and so he said he couldn't have agreed more. Don Barr, director of operations, similarly couldn't have agreed more with the other two, but had to add that the Barclay staff and that community had also felt very positively about their vestibule installed. So that's 2 schools. We did speak, though, of emotional resonance resistance to security vestibules within the community. That this, is being already linked with the bond and its prospects. Thoughts that vestibules are very expensive. Thoughts that these are fancy offices and have nothing to do with security. Thoughts that, such things. We talked about developing consensus within this board, frankly, and within the committee that met. And we talked about not having it at times, which led us to a larger point that the board must support the bond. Now, there is no bond, so the board should be developing it to something it can support. We talked about a holistic approach, seeing the big picture, and where does security and where do vestibules fit in there. Administration talked about the consistent priority of health, safety, and security. And again, calling on the board to really be the force behind the bond and getting that out to something that is robust and supported by our group. We did talk about access and how that could be reached, and basically that if you have the vestibule, you need to centralize how people can enter the building. We then talked about just having a real honest and open discussion about vestibules. They become a certain word, but they have to be demystified. And I guess there was really consensus at this point in the meeting that we really need the big picture of what we're going to do. Simply looking at any one issue will not get us to the vision of what these buildings need to do. Mr. Garrison, who had been waiting so patiently to speak, finally had so many things he needed to tell us. He reiterated that when you're building a new school, vestibules are required. He talked about, how other projects have been folded into vestibules, and so that, getting some, I think one of the takeaways here was he talked about looking at vestibules in isolation and their costs in isolation. So often when we think of it, we think in terms of a lot of other dynamics, and so that was, I think, one of the pieces of homework for Mr. Garrison as he's looking at our full footprint and holistic. He asked about equity. If we have some schools, or maybe it's equality, But if you have some schools with vestibules, they all deserve one, or why some and not others. We talked about, though, having a real conversation within the community, something that that surely is on the horizon, and thinking about, what really is at play and what is the relationship between this and bond passage or bond presentation, or the way that is constructed. And so we gave Mr. Garrison a little bit of homework, think about some costs and percentage and overall, and how does it all fit in. So that was topic one, but there were more topics to come. The next one was, we felt pretty, or at least I feel pretty strongly, and I think the committee would back me up here, that the community, or at least members of the community, wanted us to look at a multi-stage bond. And so what could a targeted bond look like? Now, here again, we went back to this idea as the board members in the committee, in terms of having the big picture and how it all fits. And in this case, that we can't look at a partial before thinking about what's the totality of work that should be done, and then how would we chunk it out based on priority, ability, funding, costs. We talked about being thoughtful and deliberate. Mr. Garrison has been working diligently. There's a lot of groups and individuals that he interfaces with to build what we've asked him as a board to build, which is a total picture of how our footprint can be nice, rejuvenated, in good shape, in totality. And so he's working through that. We talked a little bit about timeline. It seems that perhaps the committee could look at some, much more intricate draft than what he's got now in March. Maybe we would be ready in April to look at it as a full. So we want to vet this as a committee. We want to be a good committee. We want to be good stewards further along. And that, if we look at it in March, or if we look at it in April, perhaps the next meeting or the next month, we would look at what a targeted start could look like. We talked about timeline. Again, the totality of work is going to start, that macro picture, that work in summer of 23. The best we're going to do. Well, it's clearly not 21. I guess I don't have to say that now, but the math has been a little confusing at times. But the best we could do if we tried something before that was smaller would be summer of 22. So we're not talking about doing shovels in the next before a year and a half. Okay. So we talked about that. We talked about re-engaging the ad hoc group in concept, and we talked about we don't have anything to present. So that's one negative. We need a little bit of time to really have this great draft that Mr. Garrison's working on and figure out how the board feels about it first, and then get input. And we also talked about engaging zone PTA on this particular task. So we talked about ad hoc zone PTA, the community at large, but really being board-led to get to that place. Okay. At that point, everyone's favorite, we talked about public engagement, and actually made a little bit of a judgment call. We received a public comment that just fits so nicely with what we were talking about that I felt compelled to just read it. And this community member that had written in, because we had talking about public engagement, had talked about once we're ready with a bond, which of course we're not particularly close to being ready, but once we are, that we include tours of the buildings, video perhaps, involving professionals within the community, and really just having a hard look at our building conditions. We talked then about reconfiguration of schools. And so, offline, Ms. Fredell and I had talked about, the strategic planning would, if the committee agreed, bring forward a discussion to the board and then get community input on configuration or reconfiguration or looking at configuration. And we agreed as a committee that we would do that. And so before I go any further, well, first of all, next week's town hall is going to be on this topic. Yes. And I've asked Dr. Malash to show, I think there are two things strategic planning can tee up when it comes to reconfiguration as a discussion. Not a recommendation, but as a discussion. The first is where students go to elementary school. and Dr. Malash is going to present to you a map that will speak for itself. But in case it doesn't speak for itself, I think Dr. Malash is the best person to speak for it.
Thank you, Mr. Abadia. So this map shows the map of Cherry Hill. You can see if you look through the center of it here, 295, as it runs up and down, and then Turnpike as well. There's two major arteries that split Cherry Hill in half, basically for an east side and a west side. On the right-hand side of the screen in the key, this shows the elementary attendance areas. Each one of the elementary schools, the 12 elementaries, has a color that's coded with it. And then on the map, you can see that color appears as well as the name of the elementary school that goes through. You can see that where Barton, where there's a large geographic area that Clara Barton draws from, you can see Joyce Kilmer Elementary School, which has a couple of split areas, except for the one little tiny area up here in the center. It sits like a little island that sits in the middle of the pane drawing area. You see Kingston? The Kingston drawing area literally is the only, Kingston's the only elementary school that truly sits in and serves an individual community to go through. Russell Knight, you can see how it's split. Johnson Elementary School, you can see starts over here and it goes all the way across to a number of edges of town. Cooper Elementary School, where it spreads, Stockton and the spread, Bret Hart, Woodcrest, down here at the bottom for Horace Mann, and then for Sharp. So you can see that's how it's laid out. This map has been adjusted over the course of the last 25 years as there were schools that were open and were closed, or I guess over the course of the last 35 years, they were closed, and as new developments have come online and has expanded where kids travel from to attend the schools. And again, some of the areas are close to each other, some are spread out in terms of sending areas.
So one discussion is whether we look at, as a board, redrawing some of these lines, right? Having smaller, pulling things that are contiguous. Another question at the elementary level is, you have disparate sizes within the elementary schools.
Yes.
And is that something that, as we look at 12 elementary schools, that's just right, that should be more dramatic, that should be less dramatic? The one that's easy to look at, or at least conceptually, with the middle school level is, should we have 3 neighborhood schools? Do we keep the current system where we have sort of a magnet, a lottery, some kids get in? Frequently we hear that, there's some strife around that. Or is it just right the way it is? But looking at each level is a good idea. I don't believe through our strategic planning or board discussions we're ready for the high school piece, or we've talked about looking at the overall system of special ed. I don't believe either of those are ready. But for the next town hall, I think this is sort of perhaps a jumping off point, and wherever administration takes us. I think the critical thing is we need community input. Just having what we have today, I think we have enough to have a discussion, but need more. And then we turn to the final meeting of the month for the full board. It's been about a year since we had help of Mrs. Judith Wilson. Mrs. Judith Wilson developed 3 strategic goals for the board and for the work of the district. And those are, for a quick reminder, from 2020 to 2025 to look at student wellness, purpose and passion, and connecting beyond our classroom. And Dr. Malash graciously agreed to give us an update 1 year later. Obviously, those will carry us through quite a bit, but important to engage on that as we can. And so, it was very spirited. I think we had about 85 minutes. Turned into a long night, but worthwhile. And with that, I will open it up to members of the committee, so administration or other board members. Anything I missed or just totally got wrong, or anything you'd like to add.
Thanks, Ben. No, I think you covered on everything, especially about the next steps regarding getting the big picture view of what the other facilities, what their overall needs are. That was a big component of the discussion. So we could even begin a conversation about what the priorities could or should be. So I think that was really one of the biggest pieces to come out as the next step.
Ms. Friedel.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for sharing all that information. Just a couple of questions. The map where you had the different, the catchment areas for the different schools, I think it would be valuable for us to know what the student population is. So we could see how many students are at Cooper, how many are at Knight, how many are at Barton, Rosa, et cetera. I think those numbers are important as we have this discussion. So if we could get those, probably be really nice if they could be superimposed on that map. So we could kind of visualize that. My second comment, and this is more of a comment than a question, or maybe it is a question. The bottom line to a bond, and I'm going to say, when you see the pictures of the schools, or you have the opportunity to go into a school when schools were in and you would go to a back to school night or a conference or an event, you really see that there is a lot of work to be done at the schools. That's not even up for debate. I think my question is, when are we going to really be getting community voice? Because we need to invite the community to the table at appetizer, not at the end of the entree or at the dessert. They are the decision makers. They are the ones who are going to go to the polls and make a decision. So I think we really need to be very planful in when we are opening these conversations or this dialogue, so that we are considering all of these things to make a bond that will pass. So that's just my comment. And I do think that the conversation about, if we're going to talk about, what's the word, Mr. Avadia, the reconfiguration, that needs to be a conversation that we have before we move too far ahead.
Yeah.
Can I just say, Ms. Friedel, if you, and I'll put this in the memo for everybody as well, but if you go, the map that I shared, you should have a copy of it from Dr. Gribb's report from last winter. And actually, if you look at page 38, it does an actual breakdown of the enrollment and at each of the 12 elementary schools, the 3 middle schools, the alternative high school, and the 2 comprehensive high schools, based on last year's fall report data from the fall of 2019, which would probably be the most appropriate to take a look at to see where that is. For our 2 new board members, I will include that report for you in the packet this weekend as well, so you can see that. And again, that can at least give you an idea of what the enrollments are and what the makeup is of the schools.
Thank you, Dr. Malash.
If you want to look ahead of time, it's on page 38.
I wrote it down. I wrote page 38.
Mrs. Schultz?
Yeah, I just have a couple things. April, we talked about April and we talked about presenting. I'm unclear on what we're going to present in April. So that's my first question. Can I get an understanding of that before I go on with my second question? Like I'm just unclear on what is being presented to us in April.
Yep. So as a full board, maybe 2 months ago, we talked about kind of giving Mr. Garrison direction on giving us the big picture.
Okay, that's good enough. That's what's the miss for me. And I think I kind of want to echo Kim. Like, I don't know where this is fitting into the overall conversation, because we've had a lot of conversations. Vestibules, are we doing them? Aren't we? Redistricting, are we doing them? Aren't we? Multi-layer bond, are we doing that? Aren't we? Community feedback, when are we getting it? Aren't we? I don't feel that we are appropriately giving the direction to Bob. Like, we haven't had the conversation as a full board to make those decisions, and we have 5 meetings left till April. I could be alone in this, but if we don't give as a board that very direct feedback to Bob, he's going to return a product to us that we do not want. And I feel like we're going to be sorely disappointed. I don't know when those conversations take place. And that timeline for me hasn't really been defined. I could be the only one missing that, but like, I don't know where we've hashed that out as like, and I read through the memo, there were really great, you guys had great dialogue in strategic planning about, I don't even know as a board if we agree with vestibule. So is Bob Garrison right now working on a plan that he's gonna present back to us that includes vestibules and we don't agree with it?
Not yet.
Okay,
No, I think
He's
his
waiting.
intent is to present us with what the needs are.
okay.
And then let the board make the decision about, you know, what they want to support.
Like, do you understand though, like where I guess
Sure.
where I'm going with it is like I don't understand when we talk about as a board, like where are we on board? Because I guess I'm concerned that we aren't giving enough direct feedback to Bob to be able to say, this is what we want.
No,
And
Bob
when
has
we
been
have that
spending
discussion.
a lot of time in our buildings.
Okay.
So I think his intent is to come back and say, this is what I have observed.
Okay.
This is what you need to think about as you're going into the bond referendum. You need to think about the roof, and you need to think about HVAC, and you need to think, so I don't think he's gonna tell us what we should ultimately put into a bond. I think he's gonna tell us what his observations have been and what his evaluation of the building is.
Okay, so he'll present that then in April to say, based on my observations, this is what I'm wanting, and then we'll have that time to then discuss all of these. Like I said, I mean, because these are some of these topics are heavy lifting topics. I mean, these are gonna require some heavy lifting, and it's like, like in theory, we've kind of talked about, like, I know we talked about vestibules and DNF. It sounds like vestibules were talked about in strategic planning. We talked about redistricting of a sort, but like, I just want to make sure that we are building in, not only building in, but building in the conversation and building in, like, we are committing, like, and the board is getting the opportunity to also get the data and then commit to, yes, this is what we want, or no, this is what we don't want. And I also agree that the community feedback piece is really, really important, but it sounds like that's coming with the town hall.
Right, so we have town hall structured, through the springtime. And the first one is next Tuesday, it's the 19th. We have two that are on Tuesdays, January and February. So it's the third Tuesday, the 19th, and February 16th. And the rest of them are the third Monday of the month, March 15th, April 19th, May 17th. And we'll talk about June, July, and August and what that looks like. And we'll do a thought exchange as a follow-up. We'll have a town hall meeting, the interaction that gives us a chance to share information with the community and answer questions as we have. We've found that's been a good format that we can submit questions ahead of time. And Mrs. Sugars, hit on your question. I think is good. Mr. Garrison and his team, they're going to say, listen, here's the breadth of work that we believe has to be done in your school district.
Perfect.
There are certain things when you go to the community. I don't know that we're going to go to the community and say, do you think we should repair the roofs?
Right.
Do you think we should replace the HVAC system?
Right.
Do you think we should replace, interior doors, things like that? People are going to place a value on some of those and are going to certainly weigh in. At some point, the board as a group, at some point, the board's going to have to take a position and say, we believe this is what needs to go into this referendum. And that's the heavy lift that boards of education have to do, right? That was part of the discussion well over 20 years ago now when the 1999 referendum was built. The work that needed to be done, much of it still needs to be done now, needed to be done in 1999. The board made a choice about what they wanted to include, right? And what they felt they could do. This board at some point is going to have to make that choice about, we believe this should go in and this is where it should be. And at some point, you're going to have to put that out for discussion with the community. Because the other challenging piece is, the community needs to be given something that's got some sort of parameters. And that's, Mr. Abadi just kind of laid out, if we're talking about, 2 neighborhood middle schools and a magnet middle school, or are we talking about 3 neighborhood middle schools, in terms of what that looks like? Are we talking about, here's the map that, for some elementary schools, bounces kids all over Cherry Hill. We have some schools that are packed. We have some schools that have extra space in them and are not packed. Do we take a look at that? Things like that being put out to the community for the community to weigh in and say, I believe there should be this. This is how it should be configured. If you remember, in school districts, there is no right way to organize schools. There's a way to do it that meets up with the space and the money that a school district has, in order to make that happen. So it is ambitious, right, to go through and to have these discussions during the next 5 months. we are, quickly approaching the spring of 2021. Mr. Honey we talk about dates. 2021 at this point is not a time frame this calendar year for a referendum to go out. Most likely, in terms of what we're talking about. So that takes in 2022. What does that look like? What's the time frame working backwards? I think that's where we start to go through these things.
So almost like looking at then the April 5th report that Garrison's going to recommend as almost like the roadmap to the discussions then that we can then start to have and tweak the plan along the way. I guess is the way.
Let me add a couple of things.
Okay. Thank you.
Hopefully they're helpful to the question. We took ad hoc's recommendations and basically built a calendar for this year. That calendar actually expires in June. But next month is really the last month we take on a new issue. And that issue is actually looking at, since we talked about a lot, parallel paths. At some point, this work that's got to be done at the school. If we can't raise it, we got to start cutting. We got to start thinking about bigger classes. Whatever the doomsday scenario is, we've got to look at it. After that, our work from picking up rocks and looking at what's under it is almost over. We've got to do a lot of stuff that's going to involve a lot of discussion, a lot of engagement. So we took these ad hoc recommendations. We built a plan to have a topical piece. Now, I think on the board level, if we think, look, strategic planning is spending a little too much time on its own, let's get Garrison in for a progress report in February or March, I think he'd welcome it. I don't think there's any, strategic. I mean, I don't have any problem. I don't know if anyone on strategic. But for us, anything we do on committee doesn't have any force and effect. If we want to get it kind of on the record for display earlier, I think we'd be absolutely open for that. The concern that I heard at our meeting was, let's be ready when we go out because these discussions are very serious and they need to be treated very seriously, and that's fine. But we could ask for something interim from Mr. Garrison. If people want that, I think he'd be up for it. I just want to put that clarity out as well.
But I think you were doing a thorough job at the 85-minute meetings. I'm going to yield my time to let you take that on. I appreciate the clarification and the time you're putting into all the background work. I needed to clarify that for myself because they are really extensive topics.
Yeah.
So that was helpful to understand how it's all put together. But I do appreciate you are investing a lot of time in strategic planning.
Okay. All right. Excellent. Other thoughts out there? Okay. Yes, Mrs. Matlack.
Yes, thank you. To Mrs. Schultz's point, and then the discussion that Dr. Malash was just talking with us about, we really did feel in the committee members in strategic planning that we needed to have more a sense of the big picture, and we did ask that of Mr. Garrison to, and give him the time to provide us that, because we need to. All of these things that we've been talking about are pieces, and they're all important pieces, but it's hard for the committee as a whole to come to a consensus on each of these pieces without seeing how it fits into the big picture. And if we're struggling with that as a committee, then we can't come to a consensus to bring to the rest of the board. And also that expands out to the community, so it's important that we have a sense of that big picture. But while we're putting together that big picture in order to take a look at it, we're taking the time to look at these pieces and start considering them. So I know when you're not, those of us on the committee are seeing that, and it's a little bit more difficult for the rest of the board who are not on that committee to see that. And it's especially difficult for the community, to see that. So I do appreciate Dr. Malash's, showing the community the map, and the rest of the board the map, and then the discussion about the pieces that we're taking a look at, and how we really need to come to a consensus. But we have to come to that consensus based on what the big picture is. We can't take any of these just in total isolation, but we can certainly, as we're doing in strategic planning, start looking at each of these individually, which allows us to then place it in context to the big picture when we get that big picture. Mr. Ovadi, I think you did a great job of leading that discussion for our committee and of translating that to the rest of the board. And 85 minutes was accurate, but it was a good discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr.
So just kind of piggybacking on what Mrs. Matlack said, and I think that's so critical. This big picture is absolutely what's necessary. And I think quite honestly, a long range vision is what one of the challenges I think that the previous bond faced, and that was some of the feedback about it. So, I along those lines, I'm wondering, and I realize, not to pile more on to this discussion, but I think like do the work right and do it once, why are our high schools not under consideration in terms of how we want to see them, especially in light of our previous discussion tonight about the $5.1+ million repair of a section of walls that is now part of 50% approximately of a building that clearly continues to year after year require millions of dollars to be spent to repair walls just to get them safe and functional, not even to look at, are they really functioning for the way that our students are learning these days? So just wondering why that's not part of the discussion right now.
Yeah, at least from my perspective, I'll turn to Dr. Melange, but at least from my perspective, there are a lot of issues to consider. It's not that we're never having that discussion. It's that I don't think it's ready for prime time next week because we haven't spent the time as a board. So for instance, when I look at the high school level, there are the people who say build a new high school and just have one high school. When we did some talking with Mr. Garrison, what that would mean financially, it feels prohibitive, but that's a direction the board wanted to go, and that was a must do. That's something we could entertain. Those discussions need to happen more. The other thing I think about is like having a 9-10 school, 11-12 school. But I don't know that we've spent enough time as a board thinking about that. And before we put it into a town hall and start getting a lot of opinion, I guess I would join my colleagues on the board. I want to get a better sense of where we're starting and what direction are we giving and what's the thing to consider. It's a much more dynamic discussion. From Dr. Griff's report, we know that we need all these elementary schools. The question now is who goes where. We know at the middle school that the thing that we could look at is this. It becomes a little bit more complicated with high school, although we've talked about it here and there, different committees. We've talked about infrastructure as it relates to our overall special ed footprint and what that might look like and where there might be gains. So it's not a never, but I think we need to make that a little bit more and tee that up to be more. And so that's my perspective. But I don't know.
I think you encapsulated it, Mr. Vadi. I think that's the piece. I think that's one of the things that the board, in their discussions, needs to choose a path, to go through. And if it's getting some of the information from, Mr. Garrison, where he gave to us, I think back in December, and talked about, if we were to replace, high school east for that number of students, here's what we could build as square foot wise. This is what it would cost to build new. This is what less 38% will cost. This would be to replace high school west. If you were to find a space, and he told us by the state guidelines, we would not be able to build one high school because the state will not approve it, for that size, based on what their model is. But those are round numbers based on, just what the going rate is for construction. So we can certainly provide that. But that is that piece of looking at to say, if you're talking about a building that's that size, if it's going to cost, because it will cost, was it 130?
It was astronomical.
Yeah, it was well over $100 million, for the replacement of facility.
155.
150, is that what it was? Thank you, Ms. Neary.
Yeah.
You know, you look at what that impact is, and if that's what the impact is, if that's what the board wants to talk about, then at least that's a, you know, a choice to go down. But I think that, I agree with you. I think that's one of the pieces that the board's got to, you need to come along a path, because again, you know, this becomes the hard part with asking the community, you know, to weigh in. They have to have something to weigh in on. You know, if it's just that wide open piece, it makes it difficult, right? It makes it difficult for the board to take that in. It makes it difficult for the community to weigh in. And this is an area that she looks like she is ready.
Well,
Ready to go.
because I was sitting there thinking just from like a process perspective too, like as we bucket those conversations, like, so you talk about reconfiguration, right? At some point, I think we've got to then kick that over to B&F for them to review and kind of come back with, well, here's the costs associated with making those changes, right? Because there's an impact to transportation when you start to, you know, cut across those lines and how you move that. Maybe there could be a savings versus what we're doing. We don't know, but it could impact whether you would even bring that to the community because it's prohibitive in some way. Or you could sell it as that savings. I don't know. I don't want to say it one way or the other, but I think that from like a process, like we don't want to rule out that we've got to move it down that path to get that information first.
Just one more piece, and just this piggybacks on what Mrs. Friedel was saying about kind of engaging the community early and often. You know, I'm wondering, other communities that have been successful in passing bonds, how have they engaged the community? What's worked to be more successful? What can we learn from them? So that's just another, you know, kind of question I have. Not necessarily, it might just be a rhetorical question. It may not be one to be answered tonight, but just something I'm thinking to look at.
Yeah, no, Ms. Stern, it isn't really rhetorical. So I think I'm going to let, I think Mrs. Sugars has the best perspective, but it really is Mr. Garrison who's working with us. And you know, last year I don't know how much people know this, but essentially, you know, he's new, but he works with dozens of districts. He's probably the biggest architecture guy, and also, you know, has the best pulse in some senses on leading you toward a successful referendum by engaging the community. So when you talk to him, he's sort of the expert. I don't know if you want to go.
Yeah, I think, you know, I think he will be a very active partner with us, which will be different from the last referendum. And I think that, you know, he's passed referendums in all different sizes, different configurations of districts across the state, really. And I think that he will be very helpful for us in terms of how do we promote this? What do we talk about? What does the information look like that we share with the public? What has he done in other districts and what has been successful? So I think he will be a great resource for us.
And there's one place he had worked, and it was an exemplar. You mentioned it a couple of meetings ago. Maple Shade, is that right?
May have been, yeah. Maybe
Okay,
she
so
was actually
he had-
going out the same time we were in two.
Yeah, there was discussion about how you present information and how you aggregate it in order to get basically a transparency to the community in terms of the project. And one of those exemplars was one of his districts. So that's where we're hopefully.
That's what I was gonna add. Yeah, exactly that. Like during the interview process that he had that was one of the things that we talked about after, was he had a very good perspective on how to work with the community, and not only how to work with the community, but how to work with the community in a social, like, media type environment as well. That was one of the things that I remember that I had written down, and we had talked about, like, just some of his ideas that he had talked us through. They came very well prepared to talk about how to pass a bond and how to do it in a social media type environment. So I remember that was something that stuck out to me about Mr. Garrison and their particular firm. And I think it was the Maple Shade bond that he had walked us through.
Yeah, it was definitely a strength of that interview process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. That was a really great discussion. And all the committees this evening. So now that brings us to the special action agenda. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that the committee chairs move their individual committee. And I'm going to start with curriculum and instruction with Mrs. Matlack.
Thank you. Superintendent recommends, and I move the following. One, resolution approving service agreements for the 2020-21 school year. Number two, approval of attendance at conferences and workshops for the 2020-21 school year. And three, approval of summer programs for 2021. Do I have a second? Mrs. Neary, any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars?
I'm going to open up the online voting. Board members, you can cast your votes. And we have a unanimous vote.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm going to hand it now to Mrs. Schultz for the business and facilities.
The superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number one, approval of bill list. Do I have a second? Mr. Avadia, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Okay, I have opened up the online voting.
Mrs. Sugars, I need to abstain to Henry Schein on the bill list, please.
Okay.
And I don't know about anybody else, but my online voting is not.
It's not?
And mine neither.
No one is
Mine's
voting?
not.
Okay, let me try again. Oh,
There it is.
There we go.
okay.
Mrs. Sugars, I apologize. I hit the wrong button. Could you please reset mine? Is that possible?
Miriam, there's a button at the top right that says change vote.
Oh, thank you, Mrs. Schultz.
Shoot.
Newbie here, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ms. Stern. Sorry about that.
Okay, we have a unanimous vote.
Okay. I'm also then going to hand it back to Mrs. Schultz to move the human resource agenda.
Okay, the superintendent recommends, and I move the following. Number one, termination of employment certificated, termination of employment non-certificated. Number three, appointments certificated. Number four, appointments non-certificated. Number five, assignment salary change non-certificated. Number six, other compensation certificated. And number seven, other compensation non-certificated. Do I have a second? Mrs. Matlack, are there any questions? Seeing none, Mrs. Sugars.
Okay, the online voting is open. You can cast your votes. Hopefully it's open.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me know.
And we have a unanimous vote.
Mrs. Neary,
Yes.
Mrs. Neary, can I just make a comment about 3 retirements that were just approved
Yes.
on the agenda? For first, under non-certificated, retiring at the beginning of March is Mr. Irv Wolf. Mr. Wolf has been the travel trainer in the school district for a couple of decades, a phenomenal gentleman who has worked with our students in the functional and vocational program. Before that, when it was referred to as Shop West, and has worked with our students in terms of accessing transportation when they would go out to their job sites and their job shadowing, tools that they employed while they were students of ours in the district, and that many of them continue to use after they finish and graduate and go on to employment programs in their adult life. Mr. Wolf was always a gentleman, a phenomenal man who impacted literally a number of generations of our students in terms of travel and access for broadening the opportunity that students and adults had for access and being involved in activities after they graduated from our school district. And then in certificated, Mr. Enzo Wyckoff, who is a teacher at Kingston Elementary School, well-known and well-appreciated, has made a great impact at Kingston. And then Mr. Joanna Giacomo, who is one of our supervisors of special ed. Mr. Giacomo has been in the district back since the 1990s, first as a teacher at Carusi, then as an assistant principal at Beck, an assistant principal at High School West. And for probably a decade, I guess at this point, she's been a special ed supervisor. And she actually is delaying her retirement so that she can see through the ESY program this summer, again, just because of the challenges that she knows that we'll experience. Again, a phenomenal educator, a wonderful human being. All 3 will be missed in the school district. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. They will be missed. Okay, now I guess we will move the policy and legislation agenda, and I'll hand that to Ms. Friedel.
Thank you. The superintendent recommends, and I move the following: 20.1 resolution expanding compensatory leadership training reimbursement. Do I have a second? Ms. Neary? Any questions? I don't have a question. I just want to let my co-board members know that I will be abstaining from this vote. I have not been part of these discussions, so I will be abstaining.
Okay, I've opened up the online voting, so board members, you may cast your votes. We have 3 abstentions, Mrs. Stratton, Ms. Friedel, and Ms. Stern, and the rest of the board are yes votes.
Okay, great. We don't have any items for strategic planning. So that brings us now to new business on the agenda. And did we have anyone with any items for new business for this meeting? Okay. Oh, Ms. Friedel, you disappeared for a minute. Sorry about that.
I would like to, I don't know if this is new business or old business, so maybe you should move to old business. It might be there.
Okay, if no one has anything else for new business, I'll move to old business.
Okay, so several months ago, we moved from having the committee meetings all on Monday,
Yes.
and we moved them to Monday and Tuesday. And my take on it was that part of that was because we were running out of time to really have conversations. But what we've done is we've moved and we still have an hour meeting. So the meetings that occur at 6 p.m. are stopped at 7 or a few minutes after 7 because there's another meeting right after it. But the meetings that start at 7 are going 85 minutes because there's not something following it. So the conversation I'd like to have with the board is, if we're going to continue meeting on 2 separate nights, is it possible that we extend the time of the committee meetings to an hour and 15 minutes so that we're not rushed and we're not getting to the conversations or the agendas?
Oops. Ms. Matlack?
Yeah, I am on committees that start at 7 o'clock. And so, you know, we all have an enjoyable conversation as we're waiting for the other board members to finish their 6 o'clock meeting. You know, so yes, I would I would be in favor of, you know, changing those times. You know, to allow for those discussions. And, you know, so we're also not making our administrators who are coming on to those second meetings, you know, they have things to do as well. They've worked all day. So as we have. So yeah, I'd be in favor of extending that 6 o'clock meeting.
Okay, why don't, you know what? Maybe this is an instance where it makes sense to kind of go around to each member to get their perspective. I'll start in the room. Mr. Avadia?
Yeah, I would echo the same comments of both of my colleagues here. I would, if the board can allow it, I would go earlier, just out of respect for our administrators. So we're talking about, let's say, a 5:45 meeting versus extending through the night. Yeah, if 75 minutes is right. I mean, I think there's a lot to always talk about, and sitting on a 6 o'clock one and a 7 o'clock one. You know, the 6 o'clock one, it does feel, you know, like not enough time. So I'd absolutely be in support.
Okay. Mrs. Schultz?
I think I'm on HR, which is 5. We usually end a little early. And I'm on BNF, which starts at 6. So I think we could, I'm not as affected as some of my other board members, but I understand the ask, and I completely would support the extra 15 minutes.
Okay, great. Let me see who else we have. Ms. Stern?
Sorry, Ms. Neary, I would though echo Ben's comments as well, though. I think it just being respectful to our administration and our staff, if there's a way to, you know, start the meetings earlier and kind of just adjust or be flexible, just to be sensitive to the times for our staff. So, sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Ms. Stern?
I'm in agreement with what all my fellow board members have said.
Okay. Mrs. Stratton?
Yeah, I would agree, whatever time is necessary. Just want to be cognizant of the staff that have to sit back to back to back as well.
Okay, great. Ms. Arroyo?
I'm good with that.
Ms. Tong?
All in favor?
Great. I don't know, is there anything that actually has to be action, Mr. Green? Is it just an adjustment that we made to committee times?
Yes, the board can do that on its own. You don't have to have formal action on that.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
Thank-
Okay, great.
Thank you, everyone. And I agree. I think the 5:45 start time
Yes.
makes more sense so that we can try to end on time on the back end.
Yes, agreed. That makes sense. Was there anything else that anyone had under old business? Oh, Ms. Stern?
I just wanted to kind of bring back to, I don't know the right, phrasing of this, but several months ago, back in the spring, the board approved the recommendations of the Alternative Funding Committee, which I had the great fortune of serving on. And in light especially of our bond discussion, I'm just, and also even of discussion of kind of the awarding of grants and the benefits of that, I'm wondering if these recommendations we could continue to pursue them. And the overview of the recommendations are to pursue a parallel path of bond referendum development and public-private partnership opportunities was one overview. And then the other one was to establish 2 full-time positions, one grant writer and the other an alternative funding manager, to really further develop alternative funding sources, both, perhaps obviously grants, which I think we can all see the benefit from, as well as other potential things like naming rights, et cetera. So I think dovetailing with the whole bond discussion and finances, to me, it kind of, it fits. And then just the last 2 recommendations of the committee were to establish community-based task force to support facilities and alternative funding. So engaging community members, and then that consistent communication with the community about funding issues, alternative funding, bond referendum, fair funding, et cetera. So.
Great, thank you. Dr. Malash, is that something like an update that would be taken to committee, or would it come back to the full board? I don't remember what committee that came out of.
Yeah, so it would be more of a full board discussion to go through. So we allocated $20,000 as a contracted service for a grant writer this year. If the board can certainly, we can revisit that. I can put the alternative funding as well as the safety and security recommendations, because I think if you're going to revisit one, you ought to revisit both based on what it was. Now, as a district, we did take recommendations. The board, pursued some of those and made the determination that some of them were not going to be pursued. It becomes that opportunity cost with the financial impact of what exists. But if we're gonna do one, I could certainly put both of them back out to the board this weekend so that folks can review, and that can inform a discussion. If not at the next board meeting, then at a work session in February, it certainly could be referred to committee. Now, it's the challenging piece is Most of those would go across committees. Just the piece about a grant writer and a grant manager. You've got a piece that would be HR in terms of job description development, salaries, benefits, and then in terms of B&F probably, or strategic planning about what the vision for those positions would be. But I can certainly start by putting the recommendations from the committee back out to the board, and then we can kind of touch base there and see where we are. We can either have discussion, initial discussion on the 26th, in a session like this as part of old business. And if we want to go beyond that, we can move it into February as well.
Oops, Ms. Fardell.
So I think sending out the recommendations again makes sense, but my question is, since some of the recommendations that Mrs. Stern just reviewed would actually have a cost. So if the board decided that a grant writer on staff was something to pursue in the, what's the timeline as it relates to the school budget that has to go to Trenton?
Well, the preliminary budget is adopted in March, and then the window for the final budget to be adopted is between April 24th or 27th and May 4th or 5th, I think. So there is still time for that. Again, like I say, there are a number of recommendations from both committees. There are financial impacts with most of them, that are there, and that's really kind of where that goes.
So the discussion really needs to happen soon, in the event that there was a decision from the board to pursue any of that.
Ideally, before the initial budget, the preliminary budget is adopted in March.
Thank you.
Now, during the month of February, additional information will come out to the board regarding the budget for 2021, 2022. Certainly, one of the things that we wait on right now are the aid figures about what will come from the state. The governor and his comments, and I have those that will come out to the board as well, whether anybody read them. We talked about, again, making districts whole in terms of funding. He did not associate any dollars or specific dollars with that. Talked about the increase in funding over the last few years, and we'll see what that means, when it comes through. This is a challenging year for a budget, just because of the impact of the pandemic and the impact that it has had on families within this community. As we've had discussions, I would tell you, I don't see this as being a big year to be looking at a large increase in terms of the tax levy for families in Cherry Hill. I just don't think it's prudent. But we'll talk more about that as we have those numbers together going into February.
Dr. Malash, I'm so sorry, but just as a follow-up, so the state of the state address was today, correct?
Yes.
Was there anything high level that we should be aware of, or do you recommend us finding a transcript? Or
So I downloaded the transcript this afternoon. I'll send it out to the board. I just didn't have a chance before the board meeting started. I don't think that there's anything that is shocking in what the governor said. It actually was relatively brief, I will tell you, is one of the first takeaways that I had. But I don't think there, at least in terms of education and what what's going to impact us. Like I said, talk about making school districts whole. Looking at the funding, talk about the funding that they have increased through the years. Hopefully that means that $2.4 million that we were allocated a year ago and then was taken away during the summer, that at least that will come back on top of what our allocation has been. Mr. Avadia has his hand up.
Assuming Mrs. Neary is going to allow me to be recognized. I think we're inviting Gwen, who Ms. Fardell referenced earlier. I asked her by email, but since we're going to be seeing her in person, perhaps she could bring us some NJSBA best practices around alternative funding. I think in one sense, there are almost 600 districts in New Jersey. I think we want to be on the cutting edge of funding. I don't have a good sense of what that means. And actually, I mean, in the job that's not volunteer, I do development. So I'd love to see kind of what, what's emerged as best practices NJSBA has a lot of, that's our governing body. They have a lot of good stuff to offer. I'd love to hear from her. I know she's probably gonna do our ethics training and pieces like that, and that's great. But maybe we could include that in some of her engagement with us. Because, a lot of times you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. And so I think if we could include that, I would like that. That'd be helpful.
Okay, great. And I made that note, Mr. Avadia. Mrs. Stratton, I see your hand is up. I'm sorry.
Yes, I just wanted to, again, I'm this first meeting in committee of the whole session is overwhelming for the first one. But I just want to caution us too as a team to prioritize some things, because we've got, it seems like about 10,000 irons in the fire right now. And I would love to have us sit down as a board. I know we have our board goals that we're working from and district goals that we're all working from, but and then put on top of that a pandemic that we're all working through. We need to decide, time management wise, fiscal management wise, where we need to be attacking first, because otherwise we're going to go back to Mrs. Schultz's point. We're going to be, on top, one thing on top of the other, and then ultimately getting nothing done. So I just would caution us to have too many things that are like, we need to attack right now, and let's really sit down. Whether or not that means as a group, since we're reorged, we need to have a special session to prioritize some stuff. But I would just put that out there, because I'm sure as any of the parents that are watching or caregivers that are watching at this point have got to be as overwhelmed as, as we all are. So that's all my thoughts on, just adding one more thing for us to be focusing on and within what seems like the next 2 months, with just a short amount of meetings in between there.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Stratton. Sound advice. Was there anything else before we move to public comment? Okay, so that brings us to our second public comment. This comment can be on any topic, also reserved to 3 minutes. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Sugars, they will hear a sound at the end of 3 minutes.
Yes.
And as always, please remember to state your full name and your address. And I'm going to go over to that list of participants. And the first one we have is Mindy. So please state your full name and address.
Hi, Mindy Rosen, 6 Fairhaven Court. I am watching from an iPhone, and so the pictures that Mrs. Sugars presented were very little. But what it looked like to me, the glass down the hallway and in the new offices off the vestibule, the glass looks very close to the floor. And I'm just confirming that this is all shatterproof glass that is required by the building code. And so, and if it's not, I'd like to know the measurement of the glass from the floor. Because code compliance, if it was, let's say, I think it's 18 inches, but don't hold me to it, off the floor, it would need to be shatterproof glass. And also the 24 inches from a door. I mean, the code is clear. So I just want to make sure that it is shatterproof glass there, and if it's not, what the measurement is. And also, and if you could send that to me in writing, I would really appreciate it. Also, in Googling, since Mr. Avadia spoke about Mr. Garrison, who I have high regard for, I actually can't find the requirements for vestibules in new school buildings. So I would also appreciate if you could send me where it is written that new school buildings would require a vestibule and what type of vestibule that would be. Would it be like what the size of it should be? Is it $1 million vestibule or a $100,000 vestibule? Because I think that would be a difference. And I would really appreciate if I could see that in, that in writing. So those are the two things that I would appreciate in writing. If you could, let me know about the shatterproof glass at East and about where it says that vestibules are required in new school buildings. I was glad to see the ADA work being done at West and Woodcrest. Looking forward to the other 17 schools. And when you spoke of Irv Wolf retiring, that I go back to Irv Wolf. So he really was a wonderful asset to our Cherry Hill schools. So that's it. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you, Mrs. Rosen. Next, we have Rick Short. Please state your name and address.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, this is Rick Short, 1002 Chelton Parkway. I have 4 questions for the district tonight. On November 28th, Governor Murphy said he was giving out 2.6 million Abbott tests. I'm wondering if the nurses have Abbott tests. That's my first question. My second question is, if a nurse does a test, do you have to have permission from a parent? Again, personally, I don't care, but I think other community members would like to know. The third question has to do again with the CDC guidelines. I want to thank Dr. Merlash for talking more about it, but I just would like a yes or no answer. Are you increasing ventilation 2 hours before at 10% and 2 hours after? That's my third question. My fourth and final question is this. What's the master plan? I don't know if you know this, but 170 districts closed between October 28th to Christmas. That's 170 districts that closed. Yes, the district is doing well on opening windows, but what's your other plan? Why aren't you investing in HEPA filters in each class to reduce the odds of COVID spread? And again, more important, students aren't going to be vaccinated, probably by September. So guess what? The same problem is going to happen again come September and October. Don't think it's not, that COVID is just going to magically go away. So I'd appreciate any answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Short. Next, we have Ben, if you can state your full name and address.
Hello, my name is Ben Shore, 12 Manor House Court. Yeah, there is a little bit of security in there, I think we talked about in the agenda, but I'll get to it now. So I was just kind of wondering, as a board, you have the only police department in the state of New Jersey as a board. What law enforcement experience do you have that qualifies you to run a police department? What we saw at the Capitals, often people attributed to a lack of coordination, poor planning. Don't you think that it's important that if we're going to have physical security, that it be done by, managed by proper professionals? I mean, don't get me wrong, I think everyone on the board is great, but I just don't know anyone who has the law enforcement background, maybe like the Cherry Hill police chief does. So I just say that, after recent events, we really need to reevaluate our security. I worked at the Capitol, 3 members of Congress. I thought I was so safe. Never thought a single thing would happen in my life, right? But, all this stuff went down and it's possible, and I was just 3 miles away. So I ask us, are we qualified to run a police department, to coordinate the efforts needed to secure the children? I don't know. And I just want to make sure that you as a board, are you qualified to run it, or should the authority be reorganized under the Cherry Hill chief? That's kind of what I'm trying to figure out.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Okay, next we have Carolina Bevid.
Hi. First, I'd like to say congratulations on the grant, and I'd also like to express support for Mrs. Stern's recommendations to hire staff, full-time staff to pursue alternative funding. I think that would go a long way in gaining community support for an expensive bond. I'd also like to point out that there is a large body of evidence that students and teachers, especially at the elementary school level, are safe from COVID at school, even when cases are rising. I have yet to see evidence to the contrary. Please stay the course of opening schools to those who choose in-person learning, and also please do your best to expand in-person opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Bevid. Okay, next is Ilana Yaris.
Alana Yaris, 329 Cherry Hill Boulevard. I just wanted to thank the Cherry Hill Public Schools, the board, the administration for the use of the Joyce Kilmer Elementary School parking lot every Tuesday afternoon from about 3 o'clock to 7 o'clock for the kosher food distribution that we do, which is exactly the same or similar to what the district is doing, but through kosher meals. And I just wanted to update you and thank you that you helped to feed today 1,200 children, which is 16,800 meals, and that there are 20 to 25 community volunteer members, including several high school and middle school students. And I just wanted to say they are the best thing that has come out of this. And it's awesome to meet so many great high school and middle school students that the district is educating and helping. And I'm glad that we can provide them with the community service hours that we are.
Great, thank you, Ms. Yaris. Okay, I'll hand it over to Mrs. Sugars for any comments that were sent in earlier today.
I have two. Just pull them up here. The first one is from Jeff Potowitz, 110 Kilbourne Drive. I've been discussing the article entitled "The Perfect Suburban School is Living a Financial Nightmare. Here's Who is to Blame," posted June 12, 2018, updated May 14, 2019, NewJersey.com. The reason for that financial nightmare, according to local officials, is that the Chesterfield School District is getting cheated by the state. Enrollment at the school boomed from 395 students in 2007-08 to 751 at the beginning of the school year. A new preschool through 6th grade school was opened in 2011 to accommodate the projected increases. 2018-2019, Governor Murphy's budget address said Cherry Hill would receive $14,727,844. The revised appropriation act said we were to receive $17,295,270 in direct state aid to education. For Chesterfield, the governor's budget message said that they would receive $862,248. As a result of the Appropriations Act revision, they received $2,403,780. For this year, 2021, Cherry Hill's direct state aid totaled $19,528,845. For this year, Chesterfield's direct state aid totaled $2,757,745. Following numbers are approximate. Based on the school population of 775 for Chesterfield and 10,800 for Cherry Hill, per pupil aid for Chesterfield is 3,560 for Cherry Hill. The pupil aid is 1,810. We have 13.5 times the number of students than the Chesterfield School District has. One of the tenets of SFRA is that the money is to follow the at-risk child into every school district. Cherry Hill, our free reduced lunch student population is 20%. Chesterfield's free and reduced lunch student population is 5%. We also have 40 times the number of LEP students. For this year, Chesterfield Special Education Categorical Aid was $654,719. Their equalization aid was $1,899,151. We have 13.5 times the number of students. Cherry Hill Special Education Categorical Aid was $6,489,802. Our equalization aid is $8,935,352. We have a significantly greater percentage of at-risk students than Chesterfield. If we received the same amount of dollars per pupil in equalization aid and special education aid as Chesterfield, we would received at least 34.5 million this year in direct state aid. Direct state aid to education does not follow at-risk students in our school district. Like Chesterfield, our community is being cheated. Leadership at every level, please stand up for us. Next public comment is from student Ellie No. I am a freshman at East. Implementing solar panels in our district would help keep up with the world around us. And solar panels will help the district aim for a more positive future. In our state of New Jersey, there are a growing number of schools implementing solar panels. The cost of the solar panels have decreased, which makes schools more willing to take action and include solar panels in their district. The cost of solar panels are becoming more cost effective. Many schools will catch on to what may make their schools stand out and become well known to others. For example, a website called Inside Climate News states that about 5% of all K-12 US schools are now powered by the sun, and their solar capacity has almost doubled in the last 3 years, according to a new study by Solar Energy Industries Association, Solar Foundation, and Generation 180, a clean energy nonprofit. Moreover, like how many schools are taking action towards putting solar panels in our district's commitment to do the same. Let's say most schools create an environment subject to renewable energy and our schools don't do the same. Many parents and guardians in the future may want solar panels required in their schools. In the future, the majority of schools may have solar panels. However, our schools may be behind in the future if we do not act soon. We can also spread awareness of what our district has become. What our district has become a part of by implementing solar panels in schools. By implementing solar panels, we become a part of something bigger than ourselves. We become a part of the movement to help save our planet. Also, when we put solar panels in our schools, it helps show others that Cherry Hill schools are moving forward into a brighter future. This can cause more people to come to schools in Cherry Hill, as renewable energy can become an aspect people are looking for in schools. It is significant for Cherry Hill schools to have an assessment done to apply solar panels in our district. Cherry Hill is also the 11th largest school district in New Jersey. We can show that the Cherry Hill School District is making a difference to the future as well. We may need to act soon, as the generation we are now is going to be our future. And that is it.
Okay, great. Dr. Malash, did you have any comments?
I do. Thank you, Mrs. Neary. First, thank you to Ellie for submitting your comments about solar panels. I know that you have worked in your time in middle school and your time since you've been in high school, in talking about solar panels, and there's been some discussions at the high school about what that looks like. So we will certainly continue to engage in that conversation, especially as we move forward, making determinations about our facilities. Dr. Potowitz, thank you again. I think, one of the most important things as you went through and outlined some of the impacts of that funding, used the comparison that was published between Chesterfield, talked about Cherry Hill, made the comment at the end of your comments about everybody needs to please stand up and speak on behalf of Cherry Hill. I agree with you, especially with the governor doing a state of the state today, and his budget numbers are going to be determined. It's the voices of the people in our community, the constituency, reaching out to our elected officials at a local and at a state level. Please make sure that your voice is heard about how important increasing the funding to get back to a level of fair funding for our school district absolutely is. So thank you for that. Ms. Yaris, thank you for calling in. Thank you to the work that you and your husband and your group of volunteers have been doing to continue to serve those meals for almost the same amount of time that we've been doing the school lunch meals. I appreciate your advocacy, the time that you have dedicated, and for allowing students in our school district to be a part of it. We are thrilled that we are able to provide the Kilmer parking lot. The relationship certainly continues to work very well. We are very grateful for what you continue to do for so many in our community who are benefiting from your work. So thank you for that. We are, Bevan talked about returning to school. We are returning to school. Next Tuesday, the 19th, is our relaunch of the hybrid. It is 2 days a week for the schedule that we will continue to follow. Our goal is, as we've said many times, ultimately is to have all of our students and all of our staff back in schools together at the same time when we are able to do so. There are a number of steps and hurdles that will be in front of us as we continue to get there. So I appreciate that. Mr. Shore called in about campus police. A couple of things. When you talk about does the board, one of the questions was, does the board feel qualified? The board doesn't actually supervise the campus police department. The only staff member really the board supervises is me as the superintendent. And it's incumbent upon me as the superintendent to make sure that we have staff members that can appropriately fulfill their job responsibilities and duties. As job responsibilities are developed and then adopted by the board and the 9 campus police officers, we have those individuals. They are directly supervised by Mr. Anthony Saporito, who's our director of security, who held every position in the Cherry Hill Police Department except for chief. He is eminently qualified to supervise the campus police department that exists here in Cherry Hill. I couldn't be more grateful for the 9 individuals who currently make up our campus police department, 5 of whom are community members who are either currently sending their children through the district or who have sent their children through the district. But yes, we are absolutely have the appropriate people to supervise the department. We work very closely with the Cherry Hill Police Department. Chief Monahan has been involved since well before we made changes within our department in terms of what goes on and is a direct liaison with what's taking place. When we've done our hiring for campus police, we have always had a member of the Cherry Hill Police Department has participated in the interview process. Mr. Short, I do not believe that we have any COVID tests here in district. Are we pumping additional air? So part of our plan has our unit ventilators and the ventilation systems that are in the ceilings running throughout the course of the day, that throughout those 24 hours. We do not have a separate plan that's pumping 10% more air into the building though. What is the master plan? The master plan is we're looking at in terms of returning students to school, can be found online. So we return to learn plan that we are using. If there are questions after you go through that, certainly let me know, but that can be found on our website. Ms. Rosen, I will confirm, I don't have the specs in front of me. By code, there's windows that class has to be shatterproof. We passed all the code inspections for the building of the vestibule, adjusted the height of the counter to make sure that it was ADA accessible. But I certainly can confirm that with you. I just do not have those specs sitting in front of me. In terms of, Mr. Vadi talked about the state guidelines, and I can send this to you if you'd like. If you look in NJSA 18A, the actual citation is 7G-5.2. It's called Public School Facilities, Certain Security Measures Required. If you go down in 1A and then sub number 5, it says in there, there is a single public entrance to be used during the school day, which shall be equipped with a security vestibule with interior doors that must be released by school security or other staff. The district or development authority shall give consideration to providing bullet-resistant glazing in the interior vestibule doors and windows. So again, the citation is NJSA 18A:7G-5.2 1A sub 5. And certainly I can send that to you if you'd like as well. And I think that is it, Mrs. Neary.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, we do not have any other items for the second executive session, so I will make a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second? Ms. Friedel, all in favor? Great. All right. Have a good night. Thank you.
Night.
Night.